Imagine falling asleep every night with a clear mind, a calm heart, and zero tension weighing you down. No overthinking, no regrets, no endless loops of what-ifs. Just peace, deep, real peace. But let's be honest, how often do you actually feel that way when your head hits the pillow? Most people lie in bed feeling stuck in the same old thoughts. Worries from the day, stress about tomorrow, guilt from the past. The body is tired, but the mind keeps spinning like a fan that won't turn off. Sound familiar? Here's the truth. If your mind doesn't rest, you don't rest. Sleep becomes shallow, dreams become heavy, and the next morning, you wake up already feeling tired, mentally and emotionally. But what if there was another way? What if you could fall asleep feeling light, peaceful, and free inside? Tonight, you're going to learn the best Buddhist lessons to release mental burdens, gently, simply, and without effort. These aren't just ideas to think about. They are ancient tools passed down through time to help you let go of what no longer serves you. Thoughts, emotions, expectations, all of it. And here's the best part. You don't need to meditate like a monk or chant in a cave. All you have to do is listen, feel, and let go. So before we start, I want you to make a quiet promise to yourself. You can even whisper it. Tonight, I let go. I welcome peace. Say it with meaning. Say it like you mean to stop carrying the weight of your world for just one night. Because once you learn to let go, even for a few minutes, your whole life can begin to change. All right, get comfortable. Breathe slowly. Let's begin. Let's pause for a second and consider something quietly. How much of your life feels like it's constantly being shaped by something else? Thoughts leading to emotions, emotions turning into actions, one worry pulling in the next, a non-stop chain of reactions. It feels normal. It feels like life. But what if that's not actually life at all? What if the real cause of stress, heaviness, and that constant background tension isn't the events of your life, but the way your mind is reacting to them, without you even realizing? What if there's something beyond that, untouched by it all? Tonight, you're going to be guided into something rare, a lesson few people talk about and even fewer understand deeply. It's called asankata, a Pali word the Buddha used to describe something truly unique, the unconditioned. And while the word may sound complicated, its meaning points to the simplest truth of all, the part of your mind that doesn't move, doesn't react, and doesn't suffer. Most of the time, the mind is busy. It's always constructing something. It reacts to what's happening. It explains, it defends, it plans. All of that activity is part of what Buddhism calls sankhata, the conditioned. This means everything that arises due to causes and conditions. Every thought, every feeling, every opinion, every belief you hold, all of it is conditioned. None of it stands on its own. None of it is truly free. You don't have angry thoughts because you're bad. You have angry thoughts because the conditions are there for them to arise. The same goes for anxiety, craving, self-doubt, and even the belief that you need to be better. Asankata is what remains when those conditions stop. It's not a blank space, and it's not nothing. It's the still, silent clarity behind all the mental noise. Not a new idea, not a technique, not a belief. just an untouched truth, already present but hidden by the clutter of the mind. And the more you begin to sense this unconditioned nature, the more the rest of life starts to lose its tight grip on you. Not because life changes, but because you do. This isn't about learning how to force your thoughts to stop. It's about seeing through them. When you notice that thoughts are just conditioned echoes, memories, expectations, inner habits, you stop taking them so seriously. You see them arise, pass, and you remain. That you that remains is not your personality. It's not your opinions. It's the awareness that doesn't come and go. That's the beginning of discovering asankata. The Buddha didn't describe this as a place you go. He described it as the very end of struggle. The absence of fabrication, a mind that no longer grasps, no longer builds. When you stop creating more layers of interpretation and meaning, when you stop trying to fix every emotion or control every outcome, a space opens. And that space is not empty in the scary sense. It's empty of clinging, empty of pressure, empty of identity. It's peaceful because it doesn't demand anything, and it's not new. It's what was always here when the storm of the mind stops stirring up the surface. You might notice that most of your suffering doesn't come from events themselves, but from how your mind interprets them. A simple situation triggers a mental story. That story leads to a judgment. That judgment builds into a mood. That mood changes how you behave, and the cycle repeats. But the core teaching here is that all of that is optional. It only feels automatic because you've practiced it for so long. And once you begin to see that, something in you relaxes. You start to see the mechanical nature of the mind. It reacts because that's what it's conditioned to do. Not because there's something wrong with you, not because your problems are special, but because this is how minds behave when they're not seen clearly. When you finally see it, the reactions lose their power. You don't have to change them. You don't have to fight them. You simply stop identifying with them. That's when something deeper shows itself. Not an emotion, not a thought, not an experience, but a kind of silent presence that doesn't come and go. It's not excited or bored. It doesn't need praise. It doesn't worry about failure. It just is. And from there, peace arises naturally. Not the kind of peace that needs to be defended, not the kind that only lasts if everything goes your way, a peace that holds everything, that doesn't push or pull, that doesn't break under pressure. This is why the Buddha described Nibbana, the goal of the path, as the realization of the unconditioned. Because as long as your happiness depends on anything conditioned, your success, your thoughts, your reputation, your health, it's fragile. But when you stop leaning on those things, you stop suffering when they change. And they always change. But now you're rooted in what doesn't. You stop needing to be anyone. You stop needing to become. That's freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from needing to do, be, prove, achieve, or escape. A kind of contentment that can't be earned because it was never missing. It was only buried. And so the path becomes clearer. Not a path of gaining, but of releasing. Letting go of the identity built from thoughts. Letting go of the emotional storylines. Letting go of the belief that peace comes later. It comes now, when the mind is no longer chasing anything. This doesn't mean becoming passive. You still live. You still speak. You still care. But your actions come from a quiet mind, not a grasping one. And that changes the quality of everything. There's no tension behind your effort. no panic behind your plans, no tightness behind your choices, just presence, just simplicity, just what's needed, when it's needed. As this deepens, you begin to experience something unusual, the absence of inner resistance. Things still happen, but you stop creating extra suffering. That doesn't mean you feel happy all the time. It means you stop fighting whatever appears. And strangely enough, that's when joy appears, not because you forced it, but because the obstacles to joy fell away. The unconditioned is not an achievement. It's a return to what's not pulled by praise or blame, not caught in past or future, not driven by fear or desire. It doesn't mean you don't feel. It means your feelings don't define you. It doesn't mean you don't think. It means your thoughts are no longer in charge. And once that becomes real, there's a sense of space in everything. Even difficult moments feel lighter. You can be in the middle of a conversation, a challenge, or even a loss, and still feel an inner quietness that doesn't break, because your mind isn't being dragged anymore. It's resting, not sleeping, but resting in awareness that doesn't hold on. This is the teaching of Asankata, not a doctrine, not a belief system, but a glimpse into a part of consciousness that is already free. And every moment you see it, even for a breath, you weaken the hold of suffering. You dissolve another layer of reactivity. And what remains is not blankness, it's peace. So tonight, as the noise of the day begins to fade and your body starts to relax, just allow the mind to settle. Don't force it. Don't fight it. Just notice the space between thoughts, the quiet before the next story, the pause between emotions. That space is already free. That space is already whole. That space is the unconditioned. Let yourself fall into it, gently, slowly, as if returning to something you never really left, because you didn't. You were just distracted. Now, there's nothing left to fix, nothing left to become, nothing to fear. Let yourself rest and let that stillness carry you into sleep. And so, the silence remains. After touching even briefly the unconditioned, something becomes obvious. It was never a matter of adding more. It was about recognizing what didn't need to be there in the first place. But now comes a deeper look, not at the big, loud distractions of life, but at the quiet structures hiding inside the way we think, the hidden architecture of the mind that never stops building, shaping, interpreting, without permission. It is subtle, it is constant, and it creates a pressure that most people never even notice until it stops. This is the suffering not of pain or loss, but of mental construction itself. The Buddha called it sankhara dukkha, the deep, quiet discomfort born from formations. Tonight, that's what we explore. Sankhara, in its essence, means formations. These are not things you do, but patterns your mind creates in every moment. Formations of thought, formations of emotion, formations of perception. They're not random, they're not wrong, but they are automatic, and they are exhausting. The moment you open your eyes in the morning, they're already working. Before you decide what to feel, the mind is naming, comparing, filtering, narrating. Even the thought, "I just woke up," is a mental formation. It seems natural, it seems neutral. But every formation is an action, It uses energy. It subtly pushes against experience to reshape it into something familiar, something manageable. The problem is, these formations are not built on wisdom. They're built on memory, desire, fear, culture, habits. Every label you give something, beautiful, boring, unfair, useful, creates a slight tension, a distance, a judgment. And with that judgment comes dukkha, not always painful, but always a kind of unease, a background discomfort from never meeting the moment directly, always seeing it through a mental filter. These filters are not personal. You didn't choose them. They were given to you through language, upbringing, repetition. But they now live in your mind like automatic software. That's why someone can compliment you, and instead of feeling joy, a tightness forms. Because the formation that says, "I must always be enough," is triggered. Or why silence with a loved one brings unease, not peace, because the mind is forming the thought, "They should say something now." These moments seem small, but they happen constantly, and they accumulate into a kind of inner pressure. What makes sankhara dukkha so difficult to notice is how subtle it is. It's not screaming, it's whispering under every thought. A constant shaping of experience that makes it feel like you always need to be adjusting, reacting, preparing. Even when nothing is wrong, the mind is forming opinions, attaching meaning, calculating. It doesn't rest. And because it doesn't rest, you don't rest. This is why meditation can be so confronting. When you sit in silence and start watching the mind, it doesn't become quiet. It becomes loud. Not because the thoughts are increasing, but because you're finally hearing them. You begin to notice just how non-stop the forming is. One image leads to a memory. That memory leads to a story. The story leads to a reaction, then a plan, then a conclusion. All of it happening without conscious effort. And here's the key. Each of those steps is a sankhara. Each one is a formation. Not just thought, but the background structure that allows the thought to even appear. And every single one of them adds a little weight to your experience, a kind of tightness in the chest, a tension in the jaw, a spinning in the mind. This is not caused by the content of the thoughts, but by the process of formation itself. That's the deeper dukkha. The solution isn't to stop thinking. That would be just another formation. The solution is to see clearly, to understand the mechanism. When you observe a thought arise and pass without attaching to it, something changes. You're not feeding the formation, you're allowing it to dissolve. And in that dissolving, something lighter appears. Not a better thought, not a new story, but the absence of pressure. A mind not forming itself moment by moment. This requires a shift in how you pay attention. Normally, attention is horizontal, it follows the content, but freedom comes when attention turns vertical, down into the structure. Instead of asking, "What am I thinking?" you ask, "What's the mind doing to make this thought happen?" That shift reveals the whole game, and once seen, the game begins to lose its grip. One of the most powerful ways to observe this is through language. Every word you use internally is a formation. Calling something mine is not neutral. It creates a shape of ownership. It creates a tension of protection. It builds a self that can lose. Calling something wrong creates a mental opposition, even if there's no physical threat. And when the mind lives in constant opposition, constantly categorizing, separating, It suffers, even if everything looks fine from the outside. But this doesn't mean you stop using language. It means you become aware of the cost. You speak inwardly with less rush. You label with more caution. You realize that naming something is not just recognizing it, it's shaping your experience of it. And if you shape too much, too often, the weight becomes unbearable, even if you're smiling on the surface. This is where insight deepens. As you observe these patterns without reacting, you begin to see the difference between awareness and formation. Awareness is spacious. It includes. It doesn't control. Formation is narrow. It divides. It pushes. When you rest in awareness, there's no need to manage every feeling or thought. They can come and go like wind through open windows. But when you live in formation, you're constantly rearranging the furniture of your mind, hoping it'll make you feel safe. This internal rearranging is not wrong, it's just exhausting. And that exhaustion becomes your emotional baseline. You forget what peace even feels like. You think anxiety is natural. You think tightness is normal. You think effort is the only way to be okay, but it's not. These are all symptoms of sankhara dukkha, the burden of a constantly forming mind. The Buddha pointed out that liberation doesn't come by perfecting the formations. It comes by letting them go. And not just once, but again and again. Not because you're rejecting the world, but because you see that your interpretation of the world is what's making it so heavy. In that seeing, something begins to soften. You don't fight the thoughts, but you don't follow them either. You don't suppress emotions, but you don't let them carry you. You stop identifying with the architecture of the mind, and you step back into the space that sees it all. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It's freedom in the warmest sense. The freedom to be with life without reshaping it in every moment. Without the need to adjust your personality to feel loved. Without the need to defend every opinion. Without the need to add meaning to every silence. That's the end of sankhara dukkha. Not the end of thought, but the end of the pressure to make thought into your identity. This kind of release can't be forced. It grows from clarity, from noticing the moment the mind starts to shape and gently choosing not to follow, from recognizing that craving is a formation. Aversion is a formation. Even the spiritual seeker identity is a formation. They may be useful at times, but they are still part of the machinery. And the machinery will always create friction. That's what it does. But you are not the machine. You are the space in which it runs, and when you stop feeding it with identification, it begins to slow. Not because you made it, but because the fuel is gone. And what replaces it is not blankness, but spaciousness. A clarity that sees the world without filters. A presence that doesn't need to rearrange anything to feel complete. This presence doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it simply sees. And in that seeing, the weight lifts. What once felt like responsibility now feels like choice. What once felt like survival now feels like flow. This doesn't mean you don't act. It means your action comes from freedom, not from reactivity. It's cleaner, it's kinder, it's less personal and more connected. And in this, a quiet joy emerges, not the joy of excitement, but the joy of rest, the joy of not needing to constantly become something, the joy of experiencing without interpretation. That joy is subtle, but it's steady, and it doesn't depend on anything staying the same. It survives change because it doesn't come from form. It comes from what sees form clearly. This is the gift of recognizing sankhara dukkha, not just as an idea, but as a living experience. Once you taste the difference between constructed perception and bare awareness, you stop confusing them. You stop chasing highs, you stop fearing lows. You realize the middle is not boring, it's the most peaceful place there is. And the more you return to it, the less you want to leave. Not to escape life, but to meet life without the burden of constantly making sense of it. To finally feel things fully without being ruled by them. To live not from pressure, but from presence. So now, as your body softens and your mind begins to slow, let all the formations loosen their grip. You don't need to hold every thought. You don't need to explain every feeling. Let the shaping stop. Let the interpreting rest. Let the meanings fall away. And as you do, you'll notice something gently waiting underneath. A peace not formed, a rest not built. A presence that was here all along. Let it hold you now. Let it carry you into sleep. When the mind stops building, stops commenting, stops interpreting, something remarkable starts to happen. First, there's silence, then stillness. But beyond that, beyond even the release from mental formations, there is something far more profound. A threshold rarely crossed, rarely spoken about, and yet present at the core of the Buddhist path. A state not of awareness, not of peace, but of absence. Not a dullness, not unconsciousness. A cessation so complete, so still, it resets everything. This is Chitta Nirodha, the cessation of mental activity, and it is the next step in this unfolding. In the teachings of the Buddha, this state is not just a metaphor or an idea, it is an actual experience reached through the deepest meditative absorption, a state known as Nirodha Samapatti. This is not just deep relaxation, this is not bliss. This is not spacious awareness. This is the full stopping of mental consciousness. No thought, no feeling, no perception, no time, not sleep, not trance, but the complete shutting down of the mental engine, like switching off the power, without fear, without resistance. This may sound frightening. How can something so extreme be part of the path to liberation? But the key is in what happens after. When consciousness restarts, when the awareness of experience reappears, it doesn't come back the same way. The circuits that were used to thinking in loops, to reacting in patterns, to holding trauma in memory, they are softened, disrupted. The habitual grooves are smoothed out. The restart is clean. This is why the cessation of consciousness, though temporary, can leave permanent changes. In daily life, your mind is never fully still. Even when resting, some part of it is tracking, planning, defending, remembering. There is almost always a subtle pulse of becoming, of identity maintaining itself. In Nirodha Samapatti, that identity is dropped entirely, not replaced, not improved, just gone. And yet, this isn't harmful. The body doesn't collapse. The heart keeps beating. But the sense of a me being in control simply vanishes. Not forever, but long enough for the nervous system and the deeper layers of psychological tension to reset. To understand the depth of this, it helps to look at the way the mind normally operates. Consciousness is conditioned. Every thought depends on some object. Even awareness of stillness is still activity. When you say, "I'm observing," there is still duality. But in cessation, that duality stops. There is no observer, no observed, no mind watching the absence of mind. It is a gap in time where time isn't being measured. It is not even remembered clearly afterward, but its effects are unmistakable. It is not about achieving something. You cannot will yourself into Nirodha Samapatti. You cannot fake it. It comes only through a deep refinement of meditative stability known as jhana and the fading of mental volition. The practitioner gradually reduces activity layer by layer. First, external noise is left behind. Then, internal commentary. Then, even the pleasure of peace is released. Eventually, nothing is left but a readiness to stop, not out of rejection, but out of completion. And when the mind stops without clinging, without grasping, without any sense of self needing to continue, the door to cessation opens naturally. But even without entering full cessation, there is something here for everyone. Even short glimpses of deep non-doing, even the beginning of mental fading, can bring profound relief. Most people never experience one moment of mental non-activity. The thinking mind is always on. Even during dreams, it continues spinning. But when you sit in meditation and drop effort, drop identity, drop even the wish to meditate, the surface of the mind begins to calm. At first, it's subtle, just a quieting, then perhaps a disappearance of commentary, then perhaps a dissolving of the sense of time. Each layer that stops creates more space. And that space is not neutral. It is deeply healing, because it is the one thing the modern mind rarely touches: rest without self. The absence of inner construction. What's often misunderstood is that this isn't about escaping life. It's not a retreat from feeling. It's not suppression. It is, in fact, the most honest state the mind can experience, because it has nothing to hold on to. There is no narrative being shaped, no emotion being processed, no tension being digested. And for once, the inner machinery doesn't have to keep up appearances. It doesn't have to explain itself. There's nothing to explain. In this gap, subtle conditioning has no anchor. Trauma, which often survives by looping through emotional memory, cannot run if the memory processor is down. Identity patterns, which depend on thought reinforcement, weaken when thought stops. Fear, which needs mental projection to stay alive, falls away when there is no one projecting. The beauty of this is that nothing needs to be done for this healing to happen. No analysis, no confrontation, just the natural intelligence of the mind unwinding itself when given the space to shut off. And when it returns, even if the ego reappears, it is a little looser, a little lighter, less quick to defend, less desperate to be solid. Even those who never formally enter the deep states of cessation can still taste its flavor in glimpses. In moments where awareness is quiet and unclinging, even for just a breath, the system lets go. And the longer those moments are trusted, the more the mind learns that it can rest deeply without losing control. That is key. Learning to rest without control. Not managing stillness, but surrendering into it. This is the opposite of what most people are taught. From childhood, we're trained to manage experience, label emotions, plan responses. The idea of turning the mind off entirely is foreign, even scary. But once you've tasted it, once you've known that the world doesn't end when your inner dialogue disappears, you never see thinking the same way again. You don't hate it, you don't chase it, you just stop needing it every moment. This is not about being empty of thought all day long. It's about knowing that a place of full silence exists, and that even a few seconds of touching it can undo hours of inner pressure. Because the stillness you contact there is not just absence, it is potential. It is the womb of clarity. And from that silence, the mind re-emerges softer, clearer, kinder. There are teachers who say, real meditation begins when the meditator is gone. This is what they mean. As long as someone is doing meditation, the conditioned mind is still present, still forming, still managing. But when there's no one left to do anything, meditation stops being a practice and becomes a disappearance. Yet this disappearance isn't an annihilation. There's no fear in it. The fear of losing the self only exists as long as the self feels necessary. Once you see that life doesn't collapse when you are gone, a new kind of confidence arises, not the confidence of knowing things, but the confidence of not needing to know. This is perhaps the deepest reset the nervous system can receive. A complete break from the inner project of becoming, a full stop of the endless work of self-maintenance. And when the system returns from that break, it doesn't come back frantic, it comes back clear. What matters most here is trust. The trust to let go of the inner process. The trust that nothing bad will happen if the self disappears. That even without thought, without control, without effort, you will still be. Not the you think you are, but the awareness that never needed construction. You can't force this trust, but you can grow it slowly, by practicing sitting without agenda, by allowing thoughts to fade without pulling them back, by gently refusing to participate in every mental event, and then by noticing without judgment what remains. You may find that what remains is not a lack, but a fullness, a quiet presence, a mind no longer chasing itself. And as you rest there longer, the pressure to be someone relaxes, the weight of your history lifts, the loop of needing to fix everything pauses. And in that pause, you're not erased, you are revealed. This is the heart of Chitta Nirodha, not a mystical state far away, but the potential of every moment when the mind lets go so completely it stops being the one doing the seeing. The one feeling the silence is not a self. It is the silence itself. So as this night deepens and thoughts begin to dissolve again, trust what is quiet. Let it stay quiet. You don't need to name this moment. You don't need to manage it. You don't even need to stay aware of it. If everything fades, that's okay. If nothing is left, let that be. The world will still turn. The breath will still move. The body will still rest. And when you return, whether in a few minutes or after sleep, you may find the world lighter, your mind clearer, your heart more open, not because something was added, but because everything was let go. This is the blessing of cessation, not escape, not blankness, but the deepest reset a mind can know. Let yourself disappear into that reset now. Let all thoughts fall back. Let the inner world go dark, not with fear, but with rest. There's no one left to do, no need left to become, no watcher left to observe, just the pure, sacred pause. Let it hold you, let it wash you clean, and rest. After resting in that deep pause, after the mind has ceased its restless constructing and dissolved even the sense of a watcher, something begins to stir again. awareness returns, consciousness lights up gently. But what now reappears isn't the same as before. There's a softness, a slower rhythm, and in that return, a new possibility opens up, one that can only be clearly seen after experiencing a moment of not being wrapped in it. The stream of thought begins again, but this time it's no longer taken for granted. It can be observed, questioned, seen for what it really is, a stream, not a self. For most people, thought feels like identity. The words in your head don't just sound like you, they feel like you. The tone, the reactions, the assumptions, the opinions, they all come dressed in your voice, backed by your memories, shaped by your past. And so, when a thought appears, it's not treated like a passing moment. It's treated like the truth, like something that must be defended, believed, or acted on. That's how stress grows, by treating mental commentary as personal. But what if it isn't? The Buddha pointed to this very question. He taught that thought is one of the 5 aggregates or components of self-experience, but none of these are the self. Thought is just one function of mind. It arises, it passes, and it doesn't carry ownership. No one creates a thought on purpose, it simply appears. When it's pleasant, we cling to it. When it's disturbing, we try to get rid of it. But either way, we relate to it as mine. That is the problem. The moment my thought appears, suffering soon follows. When the mind sees thought as impersonal, something fundamental shifts. A thought can be kind, cruel, brilliant, absurd, but it no longer defines anything. It becomes an event, like wind moving through leaves. It is noticed, maybe even appreciated or questioned, but not claimed. That's what frees the mind from the endless emotional roller coaster. Not the absence of thought, but the absence of identification. This might seem subtle, but it has enormous power. Take a moment of anxiety. The normal approach is to believe the anxious thought, try to solve the problem it presents, or fight it as irrational. But both approaches assume the thought is yours. When that ownership drops, the energy behind it collapses. The anxious thought is just another wave in consciousness. It doesn't require solving. It doesn't reflect who you are. It's simply what the mind is producing in this moment, based on past conditions. That distance doesn't numb you, it liberates you. The key here is observation without ownership. This is not the same as detachment or pushing thought away. It's the active understanding that what arises in the mind is just an echo, not a command, not a threat, not a truth. It is a conditioned appearance, and that means it has no real authority unless you give it one. This is why mindfulness isn't just about noticing what's happening. It's about noticing how the mind adds to what's happening. The thought, "I'm not good enough," might appear in a fraction of a second. But it's not dangerous until the mind believes it, identifies with it, and builds a story around it. If the thought is seen clearly as just a product of conditioning, maybe from a comment in childhood or a cultural message absorbed unconsciously, it has no power. It rises, it falls. No one was insulted, no one failed. There's no self to be judged. That level of clarity takes practice, but it's not complicated. It begins with simple noticing. Hearing the thought without becoming the thought. Feeling the emotional ripple without reinforcing the mental storyline that came with it. That's how the narrative stream begins to thin out, not by cutting off thought, but by refusing to ride the current unconsciously. The narrative stream is what keeps identity alive. It runs like a quiet background app, telling the story of me, what I like, what I regret, what I need, what I fear. It collects memories to support its claims. It edits out what doesn't fit the image, and it presents every thought it generates as either helpful or necessary. But once seen clearly, the narrative loses its grip. The story is no longer convincing because the storyteller is exposed as just another mental function. It's helpful here to remember that even intelligent, complex thoughts are just formations. A clever analysis is not more personal than a random mental image. They're both temporary constructions. They come, they pass. They're shaped by past experiences, language habits, emotional states, and biological rhythms. But none of that adds up to a permanent self. It just adds up to a temporary stream. This is what it means to objectify thought, not in a cold or clinical way, but in a way that brings relief. Thought is not the problem. Believing it's who you are, that's the tension. When a judgmental thought arises, see it as just another weather pattern in the mind. When a fearful image flashes up, know that it's just an echo, not a prophecy. And when a proud or joyful thought appears, don't push it away, but also don't cling to it as your definition. Let it come, let it go, like watching birds fly across the sky. Beautiful or ugly, they don't leave a mark. The more you practice this kind of seeing, the more natural it becomes. You begin to trust that thoughts don't require management. They require understanding. And the understanding is this: they are not you. They are not yours. They are not permanent. And they do not require action unless there is wisdom behind that action. This kind of internal spaciousness changes how you speak to others, how you handle criticism, how you deal with pain. You begin to pause before reacting. You start noticing the story forming and choosing not to believe the first version. You become less caught in self-defense because the self being defended is no longer taken so seriously. This is not apathy. It's maturity. It's the calm of someone who has stopped confusing noise for meaning. You'll also notice the volume of thoughts starts to decrease, not because you're suppressing them, but because you're no longer fueling them. A thought needs attention to survive. Identification is its food. When attention becomes clear and calm, the thoughts that once dominated your inner space begin to dissolve faster, not all at once, but steadily. The loops become shorter, the compulsions become weaker, and what remains is a kind of inner quiet that holds everything without clinging. There's also a hidden benefit here. Creativity becomes purer. When thought is no longer personal, it becomes playful. Insight arises more freely. Solutions emerge more fluidly, because the mind is no longer blocked by self-reference. Even art, writing, or problem-solving improves, not through effort, but through space. But perhaps the greatest gift is this: suffering becomes optional. You still feel pain. You still face challenge. But the mental commentary that turns discomfort into suffering no longer has a grip. A physical ache doesn't become a story of injustice. A moment of awkwardness doesn't spiral into shame. A mistake doesn't define your identity. Because without the narrative stream tying everything together, there's just this moment, complete, real, and unburdened. This isn't something you achieve once. It's something you return to again and again. Each time you see a thought arise and let it pass, you strengthen the habit of freedom. Each time you recognize the voice in your head as just a voice, not a master, you become more grounded, and eventually, that recognition becomes second nature. You walk through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer believes every story the mind tells. That's not detachment. That's presence. You're here, fully, but no longer fooled. And that's a freedom deeper than happiness. It's the freedom of not needing to chase a better version of yourself in every thought. It's the freedom of being at ease, even when the mind is busy, because you no longer confuse its noise for your truth. As this night deepens and your awareness softens again, let the thoughts continue if they must, but watch them from a little further back. Not coldly, not with judgment, just with clarity. Let them rise like steam and disappear into silence. Let the voice in your head keep talking, but don't lean in. Don't respond. Just notice how easily it keeps going when you're not involved. And in that noticing, rest. Let the stories fall apart. Let the commentary dissolve. Let the weight of meaning fade. Thoughts will come. Let them pass. You are not what appears. You are what remains. And that is peace. When the stream of thought is no longer believed to be personal, something loosens that had been tight for a very long time. The grip of mental stories softens. The pressure to defend, explain, or become relaxes. The mind no longer needs to create a version of you out of every passing thought. And in that quiet, a new question naturally arises, not from effort, but from clarity. If these thoughts don't define who I am, then what do they really reflect? The answer begins to point in a radical direction. They reflect a mind trapped in time. Thought, by its nature, moves through time. It projects, it remembers, it loops between what happened and what might happen. Even when the body is still and the present moment is calm, the mind travels. It relives conversations, it replays failures, it imagines threats that haven't come and pleasures that haven't arrived. This constant movement doesn't just waste energy, it creates stress, longing, regret, fear. It constructs an entire emotional life around events that aren't happening, and the mind lives in this artificial world as if it were real. The Buddha saw this clearly. He didn't just point to the suffering caused by desire or identity. He pointed directly at the illusion of time as one of the deepest roots of human confusion. Not time in the physical sense. The clock still turns, seasons still change, but the psychological experience of time, the one carried inside the mind, is almost entirely invented. It is a mental habit, not a reality. And this habit keeps the mind busy with ghosts. Most of the pain people carry does not come from what is happening. It comes from what they believe has happened, or what they fear will happen. Regret is the mind building a narrative around a past that no longer exists. Anticipation is the mind preparing for something that may never arrive. In both cases, awareness is pulled away from presence and absorbed into abstraction. It's not just a distraction, it becomes a prison, because you cannot act in the past and you cannot live in the future. But the mind insists on staying there, This is why timeless awareness is not a luxury, it's not a poetic concept, it's liberation. The moment the mind stops referencing what was or what might be, it becomes light. The weight of years drops. The emotional burden of old events vanishes, not because they are erased, but because their grip on the present is released. Time only controls your life if you believe its stories. When you don't, you wake up. To begin seeing through the illusion of time, attention must return again and again to direct experience. What is happening right now without a single reference to what came before or what comes after? This is not about losing memory. It's about no longer building identity out of memory. It's not about ignoring the future. It's about no longer trying to live in a place that isn't real. The present moment is often dismissed as simple or even boring. That is only because the mind has been trained to live elsewhere. When awareness actually stays in this moment, not through effort but through recognition, something opens. The colors are sharper, the breath feels deeper. The tension that once felt normal is suddenly seen as optional because it was being held up by thoughts that required time to exist. Even the sense of self relies on time. Who you believe you are is shaped by who you think you were. The idea of becoming better depends on an imagined future. But when both past and future are seen as mental activity, nothing more than images and words, the whole identity structure begins to weaken. That is not a loss, it is a relief. This doesn't mean the mind stops functioning. Planning still happens. Memory still appears. But they no longer feel personal. They are tools, not homes. They are practical, not defining. You plan a trip without becoming the one who must control every step. You remember a mistake without becoming the one who failed. The moment the mind returns to now, the pressure created by those stories falls away. This kind of presence is not found by straining for it. It's revealed when the illusion of time is gently seen through. Every time you catch the mind drifting into a past event, you have a chance to question it. Is this memory helping me? Or is it replaying out of habit? Is this worry based on something real? Or is it a projection I've mistaken for certainty? That questioning is not mental, it's experiential. You feel the body soften when you drop a story. You notice space open when you stop feeding a worry. The future loses its grip. The past stops being a weight. And what remains is quiet clarity. A clarity that can't be named, but can be lived. This is where timeless awareness begins, in the noticing that thought is time. And when you stop following thought, time dissolves. What remains isn't static, it's alive, it moves, it breathes, but it doesn't pull you out of yourself, it doesn't carry you away, it holds you in presence. This shift changes how you meet everything. Relationships become lighter because you're not constantly comparing now to what used to be. Emotions pass more freely because they're not linked to long chains of memory. Work becomes more focused because your energy isn't split between doing and worrying. Life starts to flow without the drag of interpretation, and when challenges come, they are met directly. Not with stories about how similar this is to a previous failure, not with fears about what this might mean tomorrow. Just presence, meeting what is. That presence is intelligence. It responds with clarity. Because it's not caught in the fog of imagined outcomes. One of the deepest insights here is that suffering depends on time. Not just because of what's remembered or anticipated, but because suffering needs a narrative to survive. Pain can be intense, but without a story, pain stays as sensation. It moves, it changes, it doesn't turn into suffering. It's the thought, "This shouldn't be happening," or "This always happens to me," that turns pain into a burden. And that thought is always rooted in time. When awareness sees that clearly, it starts to pull back from the timeline. Not as avoidance, but as liberation. You stop needing to fix the past. You stop needing to control the future. You do what needs to be done, but you're no longer wrapped in anxiety or guilt. You are simply here. This here-ness is not shallow. It is the most direct access point to reality, because all of life unfolds now, not yesterday, not next week, now. When that becomes more than an idea, when it becomes your center of gravity, life feels different. Not because everything is easier, but because you are no longer dragging 1,000 invisible weights behind you. This clarity isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it's soft and stable. You wake up with less urgency. You speak with more ease. You stop rushing through meals, through conversations, through yourself. You begin to live instead of manage, and in that, the mind finds rest. This isn't a denial of responsibility. You still show up, you still care, but your caring comes from presence, not panic. You remember what matters without clinging to what can't be changed. You prepare without collapsing into fear. You live with a quiet trust, not in the future, but in the intelligence of now. Over time, this awareness grows. You notice when time-based thinking starts to take over. You don't judge it, you don't resist it, you simply return, over and over, until returning becomes natural, until the pull of the timeline loses its strength. This is not a concept to memorize, it is a doorway to walk through, the doorway of presence. It doesn't require silence, it doesn't require stillness. It requires only that you stop believing that life is elsewhere. Because it isn't. It never was. The breath has always been here. The sound, the touch, the feeling, they've all been pointing to this moment. But the mind, trained by time, kept looking away. Now, with new clarity, that looking begins to slow. The turning outward becomes turning inward. Not to analyze, but to be, to rest, to meet life as it is, without the weight of before, without the worry of after. Let that resting deepen. Let thought fall away, not because it's wrong, but because it's not needed. Let the stories go quiet. Let the habit of projecting pause. Let this moment be enough, not as an idea, but as a felt reality. Time will still move, but you don't have to move with it. Stay here, let the timeline dissolve, and let yourself rest in the freedom that has no before, no after, only this. When the grip of time begins to loosen and the habit of projecting into the past and future dissolves, the mind starts to meet life directly, unfiltered, unmeasured. But something subtler often remains, hiding just beneath that clarity. Even in the absence of thought about tomorrow, even when memory no longer clouds the moment, there can still be a quiet tension in the background. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't say, "I'm worried," or "I'm planning." It simply wants. Not for things, not for success, not even for peace, but to exist in a particular way, to be someone, to be real, to become. This is bhava-tanya, the craving for becoming, and it binds the heart just as tightly as desire or fear. The drive to become is deeply rooted. It is not just a wish to survive or achieve. It's more than ambition or self-image. It is the invisible fuel behind identity itself. It pushes the mind to constantly position itself to be a good person, a spiritual person, a productive person, a healed person. And it doesn't stop when goals are met. It simply shifts to the next form, a new self to manage, a new role to inhabit. The becoming continues even in silence, even during meditation. It's not loud, it's woven into the feeling of I am. This sense of being someone is not often questioned. In daily life, it appears harmless, even helpful. It gives structure, motivation, personality. But under closer attention, it creates tension. Every identity has boundaries to defend, standards to meet, comparisons to endure. Every form of self, even the noble ones, carries with it a subtle fear, fear of failing to maintain it, fear of not being enough, fear of being nobody. Bhava-tanha is the craving that hides in these roles, the subtle leaning toward becoming something definable, holdable, nameable. It may appear as the wish to be understood or the hope of being seen as valuable. It may show up as the drive to progress in practice, to get somewhere spiritually. It can even mask itself as the aspiration to let go or awaken. But as long as there's a mental movement toward becoming, even becoming free, the tension remains. This is why the Buddha didn't just point to desire as a problem. He pointed to the desire to be and the desire not to be as two of the deepest fetters on the path. Not because existence is wrong, but because the grasping at identity, even the subtlest one, creates friction. It resists impermanence. It seeks continuity where there is only flow, and that resistance brings suffering. Seeing this clearly doesn't require erasing the personality. It doesn't mean you stop functioning or relating. It means you begin to notice when the mind is subtly building itself again. A sense of me hardening around a reaction, a thought, a preference. That hardening is the beginning of becoming. It feels like tension in the chest, like urgency behind action, like self-importance wrapped in subtle justification. The practice here is not to destroy the sense of self. It is to stop feeding it, to stop constructing it again and again. The way out of becoming is not to become its opposite. It's to rest in the space before the becoming starts, to see the impulse arise and not follow it, to feel the need to define yourself and let it pass. This is subtle, but it is possible. And with each glimpse, the mind becomes lighter. The need to control perception fades. The importance of opinion shrinks. You stop needing to stand out. You stop needing to fit in. You stop needing to prove your depth or innocence or strength. Because the one who needs to prove anything is just another layer of becoming. Another mask the mind puts on to avoid the simplicity of just being. And being itself is not the problem. It's the selfing that rides on top of it. The construction that says, I am this, or I must not be that. That's where suffering begins. Because whatever you become, you must protect. And what must be protected will eventually bring fear. Even the craving to become peaceful can be a trap. It creates an inner checklist. Am I calm enough? Am I progressing? Am I still who I thought I was last week? That comparison keeps the mind restless. It turns presence into performance. It creates an invisible tension where there could be stillness. So what happens when the craving to become drops away, even for a moment? There is no loss. There is no blankness. There is just presence without self-reference. Things arise and pass. Emotions move through. Sensations appear and vanish, and none of it is taken personally. Not because you're detached, but because there's no center needing to be reinforced. This kind of presence is not dull. It's alive, intimate, responsive. It listens deeply. It moves with clarity. But it doesn't lean forward into an identity. It doesn't need a story. It doesn't try to leave a trace. It is empty of pressure, and yet it functions beautifully. You still speak, still act, still care, but there's no need to make it about you. That absence of self-reference frees up enormous energy. That energy can now rest or flow into compassion or creativity or silence. It's no longer wasted on inner management. The process of releasing bhavatanha starts with noticing the push, that subtle movement toward becoming, that little voice that says, I need to be understood. I want to be admired. I must be better. Not to silence it, but to see it, and in the seeing, to let it be, without obeying it, without condemning it, just letting the wave rise and fall without riding it. Over time, the impulse weakens. It becomes easier to be nobody, not in a cynical way, but in the most honest way. Nobody needing credit, nobody needing a label, nobody needing to win. And that kind of nobody is the most open space there is. It's where compassion flows freely. It's where wisdom isn't clouded by ego. It's where rest becomes natural. This is not withdrawal from life. It's full participation without tension. Because you are no longer trying to be something. You are just being, without agenda, without shape, just here. This frees you even in relationships. You stop needing to play roles. You don't try to be the wise one, the forgiving one, the helpful one. You just respond as the moment asks, without script, without effort to hold a persona. That authenticity feels light. It feels spacious. It feels like breathing for the first time after holding your breath for years. Even in solitude, the drive to become can appear. Thoughts arise that try to judge your worth based on what you're doing or thinking. The mind may wonder if you're doing it right, if you're growing fast enough, if you're enlightened enough. All of that is just more becoming, just more narrative. But when the narrative is seen as just thought, not truth, it loses power. And in that space, the mind remembers its natural state, quiet, open, not seeking, just aware. And then even the seeking for awareness can dissolve. You stop looking for states. You stop evaluating your stillness. You stop being the one trying to have an experience, because even the seeker is a role, a mask, another movement of becoming. Freedom comes not from perfecting the self, but from no longer needing one, from no longer reinforcing the illusion of solidity. This does not lead to confusion. It leads to simplicity. The kind of simplicity that doesn't ask for attention, that doesn't demand resolution, that just rests in what is. And so the path becomes clearer, not a path of improvement, but of release. Not a path of gaining, but of surrender. Not a path to become, but a path to stop becoming. And in that stopping, life begins to live itself. No struggle, no tension, just presence unfolding. No self trying to hold it together. No image being curated. No script being performed. Let that kind of stillness take root now. Let the identity loosen. Let the becoming fade. Let yourself return not to a new version of you, but to the absence of version. The body breathes, the mind rests, and in the space where no one is trying to be anything, peace begins to bloom. Let it, and stay. As the craving to become quietly dissolves, a new kind of peace begins to emerge. Not the peace that comes from achieving something or arriving somewhere, but the kind that grows from no longer needing to be anything at all. There is a lightness, a simplicity in this freedom. But even here, in this depth of letting go, there's one more form the mind often clings to without noticing. One more mask it wears while pretending not to wear any. It is subtle, it is noble, and it is deeply convincing. The identity of the spiritual seeker. This role doesn't shout. It whispers. It says, "Keep going, you're almost there." It encourages sincerity, dedication, and honesty. It guides you through suffering, through confusion, through transformation. It promises clarity, stillness, awakening. But hidden within this helpful voice is a shadow, the belief that you are someone progressing on a path, the belief that your worth is measured by how far you've come, the belief that there is a destination to reach and a self who will reach it. This belief can sustain the journey for a long time. It fuels practice, it motivates growth, it offers meaning when everything else falls apart. But eventually, it becomes its own kind of cage. Because as long as you are someone walking a path, you are still building an identity. And identity, even a spiritual one, requires protection, comparison, defense. It subtly resists the very thing it seeks. This resistance is easy to miss. It's hidden behind noble goals and pure intentions. The wish to awaken, the commitment to truth, the effort to be mindful, compassionate, or wise. All of these arise within the idea of becoming something better. But no matter how beautiful the qualities, the craving to be a spiritual person is still craving. And craving always brings contraction. It's not wrong to begin this way. Everyone starts somewhere. The wish to end suffering, to live with clarity, to understand life, these are deeply human and deeply sacred. But if they harden into an identity, they become just another thing to carry, another role to perform, another standard to live up to. The mind begins to compare. Am I more peaceful than before? Am I as awakened as that teacher? Am I failing if I still get angry? These questions are not signs of awakening. They are signs that the path has become a mirror, a way to measure yourself, a way to protect an image of progress. And every time that image is threatened by confusion, by difficulty, by human emotion, the spiritual self tightens. It doesn't want to lose ground. It doesn't want to appear wrong. It resists the flow of life to preserve the story of being on the path. Even in meditation, this shows up. The mind chases silence. It judges distraction. It counts hours. It remembers insights as achievements. It defines depth by the absence of thought. And yet all of this comes from a subtle identity, someone doing the practice well, someone worthy of being awakened. That someone doesn't exist. It is a fabrication, a refined version of the same ego that chased other forms before it found the Dharma. This is not failure. It's just the next layer to see. The ego does not disappear when you sit still or speak softly. It doesn't dissolve just because your goals are noble. It adapts. It puts on robes. It learns the right words. It starts talking about emptiness and non-duality, but underneath it is still measuring, still seeking approval, still needing to be special. The danger of the spiritual identity is that it hides inside the very thing meant to reveal the truth. It turns teachings into beliefs. It turns practice into performance. It turns presence into pride. And without careful attention, it becomes a trap more powerful than desire or fear, because it feels like truth. The Buddha did not teach a path of self-improvement. He taught a path of self-transcendence, not to become a better version of yourself, but to see that the self is not what it appears to be, not to polish the ego, but to see through its illusion, not to decorate your spiritual life with experiences, titles, or milestones, but to notice that none of these are necessary for peace. Real peace comes when the whole story of becoming, even becoming awakened, is dropped. When there is no longer someone walking, someone seeking, someone trying to reach. When the present moment is no longer a means to a better version of yourself, but the complete expression of life as it is, without commentary, without destination, without measurement. Letting go of the seeker identity doesn't mean abandoning the path. It means walking it without ownership, practicing without story, living with awareness, not as a spiritual person, but simply as awareness itself. There is no need to claim it, no need to narrate it, no need to prove it. Awareness doesn't need to be anything, it just is. This shift is subtle but transformative. You still meditate, but not to become calm. You still speak the truth, but not to be seen as wise. You still meet pain with compassion, but not to fulfill a role. You do these things because they are natural expressions of a mind that is no longer trying to be someone. Without the seeker identity, practice becomes lighter. There is no failure, no progress to defend, no identity to polish. When anger arises, it is just anger, not your failure. When clarity comes, it is just clarity, not your success. The mind stops making everything personal. It lets go of spiritual self-importance. It stops needing to be on the path all the time. This allows for honesty. You can be completely human, messy, unsure, changing. You no longer hide behind ideals. You no longer pretend to be peaceful when you're hurting. You no longer act wise when you're confused. There is no one to protect, only life unfolding. The teachings remain, the practice continues, but the identity dissolves. There is a kind of quiet in this, a deep stillness that doesn't come from effort, but from release. A gentleness that doesn't come from achievement, but from absence. When you're no longer trying to be anything, the heart finally rests. This is what the great masters pointed to. Not a path of accumulation, but a path of subtraction. A stripping away of all that is false. Not to reach a better state, but to realize that there is nothing to reach, The one who seeks awakening is the last illusion to be seen through, and when that illusion falls, there is no need to awaken. There is only what is, undivided, complete. And so the deepest letting go is not letting go of the world. It is letting go of the seeker, the one who tried so hard, the one who wanted it so badly, the one who did everything right, the one who waited for peace. That one was never real, just another story, just another attempt to be someone. When that effort ends, the mind becomes simple again, not because it figured it out, but because it no longer needs to. It no longer needs to be right, to be spiritual, to be healed. It just needs to be still. That stillness is not a goal. It is what remains when the movement toward goals fades. It is what shines through when there is no one left to maintain an image. And it is available now, not after enlightenment, not after more effort, but here in the release of the identity that says, I am becoming free. Let that identity drop now. Let the seeker rest. Let the one who walks the path dissolve into the path itself. There is no distance to cover, no future state to reach. There is only this moment, untouched by who you think you are. Stay here. No role, no seeker, no progress to make. Just the silent peace that doesn't belong to anyone and never needed to. When the path is no longer held as an identity and the seeker gently fades into silence, a deeper kind of freedom becomes possible. There is nothing left to prove, no one left to become, no spiritual self to maintain. And yet, even in that openness, something else can quietly linger, something older, heavier, less personal, but deeply rooted. It doesn't speak in the voice of your thoughts. It whispers from underneath them. It shapes your fears without asking. It sets limits without reason. It colors your experience, even when the mind is quiet. These are not your burdens. They were never yours. But they live in you, passed down silently, absorbed without question. This is collective karma, the inherited mental weight of family, culture, and history, and it can be released. Collective karma is not about blame or destiny. It's not about punishment or superstition. It's the deeply conditioned patterns passed from one mind to another, one generation to the next. It lives in how people respond to fear, to shame, to praise, to love. It appears in reactions that seem automatic, in beliefs that were never truly examined, in the background stories about who you're allowed to be. This kind of karma doesn't belong to a single person. It's shared, it's cultural, it's inherited. You didn't choose it, but you carry it. You may feel responsible for things that happened before you were born. You may feel the pressure to act in ways that match what others expect. You may feel fear or guilt that doesn't match your current life because the emotional blueprint was given to you silently by those who came before. These patterns are not visible in the way language is. They are lived out in tone, posture, habit, silence. A family that avoids anger may pass down the belief that conflict is dangerous. A culture that glorifies achievement may pass down the belief that rest is weakness. A community that suffered loss may pass down the belief that joy should not be trusted. These beliefs are rarely spoken, but they shape the nervous system, the emotional body, the inner world. To release them, they must first be seen, not just intellectually, but with mindful attention. Mindfulness allows you to notice when a reaction is not fully yours. You feel a flash of fear in a peaceful moment. You notice a wave of shame without clear cause. You pull back from success or intimacy, even though no one is stopping you. These moments hold clues. They point to something inherited, something unresolved. The key is not to analyze, but to observe with clarity. To recognize when your reaction doesn't match the reality in front of you. To ask, is this response mine or is it learned? Is this thought rooted in this moment or does it belong to a deeper lineage of belief? Awareness opens space, and in that space, these inherited patterns begin to loosen. You stop acting them out unconsciously. You begin to respond from now, not from then. The past no longer runs the present, and the burden starts to lift. Insight helps too. When you see clearly that your mother's anxiety wasn't personal, but shaped by her own trauma. When you see your father's silence as his coping, not your fault. When you understand that your ancestors acted from fear because they knew suffering, you stop carrying their emotions as your own. Compassion arises, not pity, not justification, but the understanding that suffering passes down, not because people are broken, but because they didn't know another way. That understanding sets you free. It doesn't erase pain, but it stops the cycle. You no longer pass it to others. You no longer turn it inward. You no longer act from it when it arises. You see it for what it is, a ghost from the past, not a truth about the present. This is the gift of mindfulness. It creates enough space inside you that you can watch pain arise without needing to become it. You can feel old fear without having to obey it. You can meet generational grief without being crushed by it. You are present, and that presence transforms what it sees. Letting go of collective karma is not about rejecting where you came from. It's about breaking the invisible agreement that says you must carry what was never healed. It's about saying, gently but clearly, this stops with me. Not with force, with awareness, with kindness, with wisdom. You begin to speak differently. You listen more fully. You stop reacting as if the past is happening again. You become a different kind of presence in the world, one that doesn't carry forward the fear, the resentment, the guilt that was passed to you, and in that presence, others feel safe. Not because you fixed them, but because you no longer feed the patterns that harm. You become a mirror for what is possible. You become the space where old karma ends and clarity begins. This process may feel slow at times. The patterns can be deep. They rise when you least expect them. But every moment of mindfulness weakens the chain. Every time you notice the inherited reaction and choose not to act from it, something dissolves. It may not be visible, but it is real. You may feel grief as the old identity softens. You may feel anger as suppressed emotions surface. These too can be met with mindfulness, not to push them away, but to hold them, see them, let them move. Because once they move, they don't return in the same way. They don't grip you as they once did. Even cultural burdens can shift. The belief that you must succeed to be loved. The fear of expressing truth in case it breaks connection. The idea that vulnerability is weakness. These are not universal. They are learned. They can be unlearned. Not all at once, but gently. Through presence, through inquiry, through courage. It helps to remember, you are not the first to feel this. Every generation holds unprocessed pain, but not everyone has the clarity to stop carrying it. That clarity is rare. It is sacred, and it brings light into places that have stayed dark for a long time. Let yourself be that light, not by effort, but by non-participation in what no longer serves. You don't need to fix the past. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to stop carrying the weight that was never yours. You are allowed to be new, not as a rejection of your roots, but as a fulfillment of what those before you could not yet complete. Their survival made your clarity possible. Now your clarity makes healing possible. Let the old pain arise, not as a threat, but as a teacher. Let the inherited fear show itself, not to frighten you, but to be released. Let the stories of the past fall away, not by force, but by no longer feeding them. There is no need to reject your family or culture. You honor them best by becoming free of what harmed them. You honor them by choosing presence over patterns. You honor them by living without repeating what they never had the tools to see. This is not rebellion. It is liberation. It is the quiet revolution of stopping what never had to continue. And it begins in the simplest way, noticing what does not belong and choosing to let it pass. No blame, no shame, just freedom. Let it begin here. Let it deepen now. Let yourself rest in a mind that is no longer inherited, but alive. No longer shaped by history, but open to this moment. And let that openness be the end of what began long before you and never needed to continue through you. After the inherited burdens of the past begin to loosen, when the mind stops repeating what was silently passed down, a deeper stillness becomes accessible. The body may feel lighter, the emotional tone more quiet. But if you sit with this silence long enough, another layer reveals itself, not loud, not dramatic, just a question that starts to form on its own. What exactly continues from moment to moment? If I am not the stories, not the roles, not the lineage, then what remains? What carries me from one breath to the next? This is where the illusion of continuity begins to crack open. Not just the illusion of self, but something even subtler, the illusion of a continuous mind stream, a silent assumption that behind all these thoughts, feelings, and moments, there is something flowing, some steady thread linking one mental moment to the next. It's not something we consciously believe, it's something we live as if it's true. In both Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, this assumption is gently but directly challenged. The teachings don't just deconstruct the self, they question whether even a subtle continuity of consciousness exists the way we think it does. What appears as a smooth stream is actually a sequence of discrete moments, flashes of awareness, each conditioned, each fading, none carrying permanence. What feels like continuity is the mind remembering the last flicker and stitching it together with the current one. But there's no thread, there's no line, just contact, cessation, contact again. This breaks the heart of identification, because if there is no ongoing observer, then what you take as you is just the memory of the last thought and the anticipation of the next. Awareness seems to move through time, but really, time is constructed by the memory of awareness. Take away that linking function, take away the glue, and the illusion collapses. There's a kind of disorientation that can follow. The mind might resist. It wants a ground, something solid behind experience. But the teachings say there isn't one. And the more this is seen, not just understood, the more liberating it becomes. Because if there's no one flowing through time, then there's nothing to defend, protect, or fix. No identity trapped in a flawed past. No witness carrying shame or pride. Just a flicker of mind, here now, gone the next. This doesn't mean awareness disappears. It means awareness stops pretending to be a person moving through time. Experience continues to arise. You still see, hear, feel, respond, but there's no permanent experiencer, no inner self holding it all together. This view doesn't flatten life, it reveals its fluidity. Mahayana texts like the Prajnaparamita literature speak of this through emptiness. Not just the emptiness of things, but the emptiness of mind itself. No essence, no unchanging core, just function, just arising and vanishing, like the reflection of the moon in water, visible, responsive, beautiful, but with no fixed reality beneath it. Vajrayana goes even further. It teaches that what appears as mind stream is itself the play of luminosity, clear, vivid awareness that has no center. The appearance of continuity is like the spinning of a wheel of fire. Hold a spark and move it fast. It looks like a circle, but there's no actual circle, just rapid appearances mistaken for something whole. When this insight sinks in, a new kind of peace arises, not the peace of answers, but the peace of no longer needing to pretend. The whole psychological structure that depends on continuity begins to dissolve. Long-standing guilt over who you were 5 years ago loses meaning. Anxious planning about what you'll become tomorrow fades. Not because the events don't matter, but because the one tying them together isn't real. This helps explain why clinging to memory brings suffering. The mind believes that what it remembers defines what it is now. But if there's no real thread connecting the one who felt pain in the past to the one breathing now, then that memory can be released, not repressed, not ignored, just seen as belonging to a moment that no longer exists. A mind event that happened, ended, and need not define anything. This isn't denial, it's clarity. Memory arises now. It's not a window into a real, ongoing past. It's a present moment construction. The idea of being the same person across time is just a structure built from repeated remembering. The concept of identity is sustained by looping reference points. Without that looping, there's only fresh experience. The illusion of continuity also holds up striving. The urge to become better, to be enlightened, to progress, all of it rests on the belief in a self moving through time. Take that away, and what's left is this moment. Whole, without need, without lack. All that changes is appearance, not essence, because there is no essence moving through. This doesn't make effort meaningless. It transforms it. Instead of being a project that defines you, effort becomes expression. You act not to fulfill a personal timeline, but because the present moment calls for something. You help someone, not to be a good person, but because kindness arose. You meditate, not to achieve a goal, but because stillness is beautiful. Even karma is re-understood. It's not a soul collecting marks. It's simply cause and effect, moment to moment. Intentions shape experience, not because a person carries them, but because each moment carries the seeds of the next. But no one owns the seeds, no one owns the fruit. That's what makes true release possible. You don't need to fix the past. The past doesn't carry forward. You don't need to guarantee the future. The future never arrives as itself. There's only this, and then this, and then this. Each complete, each unowned. Meditation can reveal this directly, not in dramatic insight, but in noticing how awareness keeps resetting. You're not actually watching a flow, you're seeing individual moments of seeing. Hearing is not a stream, it's a series of bursts. Each sensation arises, disappears. What feels like movement is the mind constructing motion out of stillness. When this is deeply known, stress drops. Not because the world changes, but because the imagined continuity is no longer driving the system. You stop performing for your own imagined future. You stop defending your constructed past. And with that, a kind of spaciousness appears. It was always here, but now it's felt. In this space, emotions arise and pass with less stickiness. Joy comes not as a reward, but as a natural result of openness. Sorrow may still visit, but it's not clung to as personal loss. There's no one it needs to define. Thoughts come and go like birds landing briefly on water. You don't chase them, you don't push them away. They just don't become you. This realization doesn't remove life's complexity, but it removes the imaginary thread tying everything together. It allows for forgiveness because there's no fixed self to blame. It allows for humility because there's no self to elevate. It allows for change because there's no inner identity that needs to remain stable. And from this absence of thread, something very alive emerges. A kind of freedom that doesn't depend on circumstances, a joy that doesn't depend on achievement, a connection with others that doesn't depend on stories about who you are, because once you stop believing in a permanent stream, you stop separating yourself from everything else. If there's no self continuing, there's also no boundary to protect. The mind is no longer a container. It becomes a field, open, participatory, non-local. In this field, compassion flows more freely. You see others not as characters in your timeline, but as appearances in awareness, just like you. You respond with less agenda. You listen without filtering everything through your identity. You live without maintaining the illusion, and that illusion can drop right now, not after practice, not after understanding, just now in seeing clearly that this thought, this breath, this feeling, none of it proves a self behind the curtain. There is no curtain, no behind, just appearance, just clarity, just this. Let yourself rest in that absence. Not with fear, but with welcome. Let the idea of being someone with a fixed history soften. Let the need for continuity dissolve. Let the present moment reveal itself as unstrung, free, whole, and stay there, even for a few seconds. Not as a practice, as a return to what never needed continuity, never needed ownership, never needed to be anything other than what it already is. Let it be simple. Let it be enough. Let it be empty. Let it be free. When the illusion of continuity fades, something unshakable begins to take its place, not in the form of a fixed truth, but in the form of immediacy. No self behind the thoughts, no stream carrying you forward, just presence, just awareness, moment after moment, fresh and self-existing. Yet even here, there can still be a lingering trace of ownership, a quiet assumption that behind the clarity, someone is watching. A final position that says, I am the one who is aware. Subtle, convincing, and deeply ingrained, this last layer of ego identity hides in the role of the observer. But there is a direct way to cut through this illusion. A simple, piercing insight delivered in a single teaching, the Bahia Sutta. Of all the Buddha's discourses, the Bahia Sutta is one of the shortest and most radical. In a few lines, it dissolves not only the personal self, but the very structure of duality. The teaching is direct, urgent, and uncompromising. In the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. In the cognized, only the cognized. What this points to is not a philosophy, but a shift in perception, a complete reframing of how experience is understood, a stripping away of the observer behind the experience, the doer behind the doing, the knower behind the knowing. The instruction is simple. Meet the world without inserting yourself into it. Let sight be sight. Let sound be sound. Don't add a seer. Don't add a hearer. This is not abstraction. It's the most grounded thing there is. It means looking without the lens of identity, hearing without translating sound into meaning about yourself, feeling without turning sensation into a personal story, cognition without the thinker. This shifts everything, because most suffering doesn't arise from what is seen, heard, or felt. It arises from the addition, the internal narrative that says, "This is happening to me," or "I am the one interpreting this." It's the ego constructing itself around neutral events, but when the raw experience is met as it is, without the self layer, the construction collapses, and what's left is just the world, appearing in its simplicity, clear, immediate, undistorted. This kind of seeing is not passive, it's alert, awake, but it doesn't personalize. When there is only the seen in the seen, there is no observer forming opinions, no one grasping or resisting, just color, shape, movement, without being translated into a self-experience. This doesn't remove meaning from life. It removes distortion. What remains is a direct intimacy with the world, unmediated, undivided. In practice, this means catching the mind at the moment it begins to insert itself, seeing a tree and noticing the instant it becomes my experience of a tree, hearing a sound and recognizing the subtle claim, "I am hearing." These claims happen fast, often unnoticed, but they are the core of ego construction. Each one reinforces the sense of a separate observer behind perception. Each one solidifies the illusion that experience belongs to someone. But when the instruction of the Bahia Sutta is applied in real time, that insertion is seen and stopped. Not by force, by clarity. There is no need to suppress thought. Just see the thought arise and don't add a thinker. See the sound arise and don't add a hearer. The experience remains, the interpretation drops, and with it, the personal tension dissolves. This is not a theory. It's an experiment. The next time you're walking, try looking without saying, "I see." Let sight just be sight. Don't reference yourself. Let sound arise without a mental label. Don't measure what it means for you. Let feelings come without needing to make them personal. The more this is practiced, the more natural it becomes. The body relaxes, the mind softens. Life becomes quieter, not because less is happening, but because the mind isn't turning every event into a mirror for its identity. This insight also reveals something profound about awareness. It doesn't need to be located. The moment you stop saying, "I am aware," awareness shows itself as non-local, not inside the body, not behind the eyes, not owned by a person, just open clarity, functioning naturally. There's no center, no background observer, just phenomena arising and passing in the field of knowing. And because there's no center, there's no separation. What is seen and the seeing are not two. What is heard and the hearing are not separate. There is just the movement of life, color, sound, sensation, thought, unfolding without a boundary between subject and object. This is not mystical, it's simple. So simple that the thinking mind can't grasp it. It must be lived. This is why the Bahia Sutta points directly. It doesn't offer a path to follow over years. It offers a moment of recognition. And when that recognition is stable, the burden of self drops completely. The grasping mind has nothing left to hold on to. There is nothing to protect because there is no one to be hurt. There is nothing to achieve because there is no one who lacks. There is only this moment, complete as it is. Resistance to this can come in many forms. The mind might say, "But I am still here." But look closer. What exactly is here? A thought, a sensation, a mood. All of these are part of the seen, heard, or sensed. None of them require a self. The idea of self is just another thought, appearing like any other. No more special, no more substantial. When this is fully seen, the role of the witness also dissolves. Even the subtle identity of being the one who observes everything is let go. Because the observer is also just an idea, a position the mind takes. Without that position, what's left is presence without a watcher, experience without a center. This doesn't remove love or care or meaning. It deepens them, because when the self isn't in the way, connection becomes effortless. Compassion flows naturally, not as a choice, but as the basic nature of unfiltered experience. There is no me helping you. There is just the movement of care, the response of clarity to suffering, without distance. In this way, the Bahia Sutta is not just a pointer, it's a doorway, a way to live, a way to walk through the world without dragging a constructed self behind every step. A way to see clearly, feel deeply, and respond wisely without the burden of constantly being someone. This can be practiced in any moment. Washing dishes, talking with a friend, sitting in silence. Let the experience arise, but don't create a seer, a speaker, a doer. Let the activity unfold without the imagined agent behind it. You'll find that life continues. Decisions happen, movement flows, but without the tension of self. Even in moments of difficulty, this insight holds. Pain arises, but there is no one being hurt. Anger appears, but there is no self who owns it. Fear moves through the system, but there is no core that can be threatened. This is not dissociation. It's intimacy without possession. a closeness to life that comes from not turning it into identity. Eventually, this becomes the default, not as a special state, but as a return to what was always true. The self never did the seeing, it only claimed it. And when that claim stops, there is peace. Let that peace take root now. Let sight be just sight. Let thought be just thought. Let awareness function without a center. Let the world appear without a you inside it, not as rejection, as release. There is no seer here, no hearer, no self behind the moment. Only this, only what is, and that is enough. When the idea of a seer falls away and experience is left untouched by identity, the world opens in a way that words can't explain. The sound is no longer heard by someone, it is simply sound. The shape is not seen by a watcher, it is only color and form. Thought arises, but no thinker holds it. This seeing dissolves the need to insert anything personal into the moment. But even this level of clarity still carries a subtle appearance, the appearance that the present is made of solid moments. Stillness remains, but experience may still feel continuous, smooth, dependable. Yet deeper attention shows something else entirely. Beneath even this simplicity lies motion, not of thought, not of emotion, but of pure appearance and disappearance, so rapid, so fine, it escapes ordinary awareness. This is where the reality of Bhanga is revealed. The moment-to-moment dissolution of all conditioned phenomena. In Vipassana meditation, Bhanga is not taught as an idea, but experienced directly. It is the rapid vanishing of sensations, thoughts, sounds, images, everything that arises in consciousness. When observed closely, nothing holds, nothing stays. Every flicker of experience breaks apart almost instantly after arising. The body does not feel like a fixed mass, but a moving stream of changing sensations. Thought does not feel like a line of logic, but like sparks flashing in and out of nowhere. Awareness lands on a single point, and even that point shatters in less than a second. What this shows is not new. It is not something added to experience. It is what was always happening, hidden by the mind's habit of continuity. Without deep awareness, the mind links these micro-events into a story, a stream, a thing that persists. But it never truly does. The only reason we experience stability is because we're not looking close enough. When mindfulness sharpens, the mind no longer stitches appearances together. It sees what's actually there, and what's there is disintegration. This recognition does something extraordinary. It undercuts attachment at the root, not through effort or suppression, but through clear seeing. If everything is breaking down moment by moment, there's nothing solid to hold. Clinging only happens when we believe there's something to grasp. If every sensation is vanishing as fast as it arises, what is there to desire? What is there to fear losing? Every object, every mood, every thought is already in the process of disappearing the moment it is known. This doesn't make experience feel empty in a lifeless way. It makes it light, free, unburdened. Joy can arise, but you don't have to keep it. Pain can arise, and you don't have to fight it, because you see, truly see, that none of it lasts longer than a moment. Not conceptually, not philosophically, but directly. The knowing is embodied, the seeing is visceral. And with that, the grip of habit starts to fall apart. Even physical sensation, which usually feels solid and constant, reveals itself as granular. When attention is stable and still, the apparent consistency of the body disappears. What was once felt as a fixed shape becomes a field of vibrating particles, rising and passing, flickering and dissolving. What once seemed like a pain becomes a cluster of vanishing points, none of which last long enough to be painful on their own. This is not imagination. It is the nervous system no longer projecting continuity. It is the mind resting in real-time impermanence. And thought, once seen as a flowing narrative, breaks into separate flashes. A word appears, and it ends. Another follows, and it ends. The space between thoughts becomes more visible. Eventually, thought doesn't seem to flow. It seems to blink. This blinking doesn't mean something is wrong. It means the illusion of cohesion is falling away. It means thought is being seen as it is, a chain of brief events, not a living stream. The more this is seen, the less you need to fix your experience. The craving to control subsides. There's no demand that things should be different, because you're not trying to make anything stay. Even pleasant states, which used to be clung to as refuge, are seen as unstable. This brings a new kind of rest. A rest that doesn't come from holding on, but from not holding at all. In this way, hunger does not bring despair, it brings release. The breakdown of experience is not threatening once the mind accepts that it never needed permanence to be at peace. The fear of change vanishes when you understand that change is not happening to you. It is all that has ever happened. There is no you separate from the changing, just change itself. This recognition also deepens equanimity. If every sensation is vanishing, then both pleasure and pain lose their weight, not in a numb way, but in a balanced way. The heart no longer tilts forward into desire or back into resistance. It stays centered, calm, open. This balance isn't forced. It is the natural result of seeing clearly. When nothing sticks, nothing drags the mind off balance. And in relationships, the same insight applies. The way someone looks, the words they speak, the feelings they stir up, none of it lasts. Each moment of connection is born and gone in the blink of an eye. Even memory is made of these brief moments. So instead of clinging to how someone was or how you were with them, you meet them now, fresh. You love more freely because you're not trying to keep anything. You forgive more easily because you're not bound by past formations. Even identity, so central to ordinary life, shows its fragility. If all mental and physical events are dissolving and there is no core carrying them forward, then who are you? The answer is not abstract. You are nothing fixed, nothing separate, just this flickering field of experience, endlessly arising and vanishing, endlessly new. This is not frightening when it's seen clearly. It is peaceful. It is honest. It is the truth that never needed protection. And from this insight, compassion deepens. When you see that others are also living in this dissolving stream, also clinging to fleeting sensations as if they were solid, something opens. You stop judging. You stop blaming. You see how easy it is to suffer when you don't see clearly. And that understanding becomes tenderness, not pity, just presence. Quiet, respectful presence. Meditation becomes less about achieving and more about witnessing. You sit, not to arrive at a state, but to see what is already falling apart. You don't seek stillness, but you become still enough to see the breakdown, and the more you see it, the more the mind lets go on its own. Not because it has to, but because it understands. It understands that clinging is unnecessary, that holding is exhausting, that freedom is found in flow, not in control. This seeing also reveals beauty, not in the objects themselves, but in their disappearing. A sound fades, and its vanishing is beautiful. A breath ends, and the end is luminous. A thought falls silent, and the silence is rich. Experience becomes a dance of presence and fading. Nothing lasts, and nothing needs to. That's what makes it full. This is not a trance, it is the sharpest clarity. It is mindfulness no longer distracted by content, but focused on the structure of reality itself, seeing not what appears, but how it appears. And in that structure, dissolution is not a defect. It is the very nature of conditioned things. It is their truth. Seeing Panga in this way also prepares the mind for even deeper insights. When everything is seen as dissolving, the idea of a permanent self becomes laughable. The idea of a soul moving through time loses weight. The entire framework of identity begins to crumble. And what remains is freedom, not in theory, but in lived experience. And with that freedom, effort also shifts. You stop trying to hold attention. You stop trying to keep the breath steady. You stop trying to freeze stillness. Because you see, trying to make anything permanent goes against the nature of experience. Instead, you let go. You allow. You stay close to the vanishing. And that closeness is peace. Let that peace rise now. Not from stillness that stays, but from the knowing that nothing needs to stay. Let each moment pass. Let each sound disappear. Let each breath fade into nothing. And let your awareness remain, not as a self, but as the openness in which all things come and go. There is no permanence here, only arising, only vanishing, only freedom in the flow. As the mind begins to witness dissolution in every moment, not just as a concept, but as a lived and intimate reality, something profound starts to happen. The grip of craving weakens. The illusion of permanence vanishes. What was once thought to be solid breaks apart before the eyes of awareness, and in that continuous falling away, peace starts to arise, not as an achievement, but as the natural resting of a mind no longer reaching. Yet even within this clarity, there can remain a final position, a subtle layer that seems untouched by the vanishing, the silent observer, the inner witness, the one who sees everything but is not seen. It feels pure, impartial, safe. But it too is a position. It too is a construction. And until this observer identity is released, complete freedom remains out of reach. The idea of the witness often arises in sincere spiritual practice. As the mind detaches from thought, as craving drops and the body quiets, a space of clarity opens. Within that clarity, there is still a sense that someone is aware. Not the ego in its usual noisy form, but something more refined. A quiet center that seems to just watch. It doesn't react. It doesn't crave. It just observes. And for many, this feels like arrival. But the subtle trap is this. The moment you believe there is someone watching, you've created another identity. It may not speak in the language of desire or fear, but it still carries separation. It still defines. It says, "This is me, the awareness, watching all that arises." And that statement, silent as it may be, is still dualistic. It still assumes a divide between the observer and the observed, between the witness and the world. That separation, even in its most delicate form, is still tension. The observer identity can be more persistent than the ordinary ego because it feels peaceful. It isn't obviously destructive, it doesn't agitate, but it does maintain a self, a position, and where there is position, there is defense. The witness still carries the subtle fear of losing itself. It still watches in order to stay in control. It still stands apart from what is. And in doing so, it blocks the deepest intimacy with experience, the intimacy that comes only when there is no center at all. To begin dismantling this subtle identity, attention must turn inward with great honesty. The first step is recognizing the observer as a phenomenon, not as who you are, but as something that appears. You don't need to reject it. You don't need to dismantle it forcefully. Just see it clearly. Notice how it functions. Notice how it quietly claims ownership of awareness. It says, "I am the one who knows this moment." But what is that I? Is it seen? Can it be found? Or is it just another idea held in place by subtle thought? When you begin to ask these questions, the structure of the witness begins to wobble, because the truth is, awareness does not need an owner. It doesn't need a watcher. It doesn't need to be anchored in a subject. It just is. It functions on its own. Seeing, hearing, sensing, all arise spontaneously without a self behind them. The observer identity is simply the last mask of ego, and when it is seen as such, it begins to dissolve. Practices that reveal this truth are not about adding anything. They are about staying close to what's already happening and refusing to take a stance. In meditation, when a thought arises, don't retreat into the witness. Just see the thought. Let it appear and disappear. Don't step back. Step nowhere. Let the thought pass through without an observer. When a sound is heard, don't say, "I'm hearing this." Let there just be hearing, no witness, no position, just sound arising in space. This is what it means to go beyond dualistic witnessing. It's not passive observation. It's the complete absence of positioning. It's the realization that awareness doesn't belong to anyone. That clarity doesn't need a center. That presence is not a role. When this is seen, the mind stops taking refuge in the witness. It lets even that go. And what remains is just this, alive, open, ownerless. This process can feel disorienting at first. Without the observer, the mind may feel like it's nowhere. But that nowhere is the doorway to non-duality. The self never existed as a fixed point, not even as the witness. The witness was simply the final grasping of identity, the last effort to hold on to a sense of continuity. And now even that is fading. One of the most powerful insights in this process is seeing that the observer is actually a thought. It's a subtle one. It doesn't use words, but it places awareness in a reference point. That reference point can be felt as being in the head, or behind the eyes, or in the center. But none of those locations are real. They are simply habits of attention. When attention relaxes those habits, the center vanishes. Awareness is no longer mine. It just is. And in that isness, something extraordinary happens. Experience stops being divided. The boundary between inner and outer dissolves. The subject-object framework collapses. There is no longer someone seeing a tree. There is only seeing with no distance, no seer, no seen, just the immediacy of experience. From here, compassion becomes effortless. Not because there's someone being compassionate, but because there's no separation. You don't love the other. You are the other, not as a concept, as reality. The illusion of the witness kept the world at arm's length. Without it, everything is close. Everything is you. And this includes pain. It includes discomfort. It includes uncertainty. But none of these are personal anymore. Without the witness, suffering doesn't stick. It arises, it's known, and it's gone. There's no one there to carry it forward. No one to turn it into a story, no one to be burdened by it. This is not coldness, it's intimacy without clinging. Over time, the mind stops constructing an inner space to retreat into. It doesn't need to be the watcher. It doesn't need to maintain a spiritual stance. Life becomes simpler, more immediate. You laugh more easily. You cry without resistance. You meet moments without needing to process them through a self. This is not the end of personality. It's the end of identification. Even in conversation, this freedom shows itself. You no longer observe yourself speaking. You just speak. Words come and go. Thoughts arise and vanish. Responses appear naturally, without calculation. There's no you being aware of it all, just awareness moving, just life living itself. This kind of presence is not fragile. It doesn't require effort. It doesn't get tired. Because it's not being held together by thought. It is what remains when all effort stops, when all roles dissolve, when even the witness lets go. At this point, practice no longer feels like practice. It's not something you do. It's just how life unfolds when you're no longer holding any position. And if the witness arises again, you see it for what it is, a movement of mind, a habit, not a problem, just another appearance, seen, released, gone. Let it go now. Let the quiet observer drop. Let the sense of watching dissolve into the watched. Let awareness be free of ownership. Let experience unfold without separation. There is no one left behind the moment. Only the moment. No position, no witness, no center. Just this. When the subtle identity of the witness is finally seen and released, awareness becomes truly centerless. There is no one watching. There is only what is. No one is meditating. There is only stillness. No one is letting go. There is only the letting go itself. Experience, once filtered through the quiet observer, now flows freely, unclaimed and unbound. But even in this openness, another illusion remains quietly embedded, a hidden structure that continues shaping perception and quietly reattaching weight to the moment. It is not a thought or a role, it is time, not the clock or the calendar, but mental time, the division of experience into past, present, and future. As long as this illusion holds, suffering finds a foothold. Zen teachings take this head-on. not by analyzing time, but by collapsing it entirely. Zen does not explain reality. It points to it, breaks your expectations about it, and shocks you out of the habit of trying to define it. And one of the deepest habits it confronts is your belief in linear time. This belief is not just philosophical. It shapes your daily mind. The memory of what happened yesterday quietly defines your identity today. The fear of what might happen tomorrow shapes your tension in this hour. Even the moment you call now is usually just a blurry space between remembering and planning. There is almost never a pure encounter with what is, because the mind is trained to live through time. Zen points out that this training is based on illusion. When a monk asks, "What is Buddha?" and the master answers, "3 pounds of flax," the response is not nonsense. It is a cut, a slash through the habit of linear thinking. The question wants meaning. The answer offers immediacy. There is no past Buddha to define. There is only this. Koans serve this purpose with radical precision. They are not puzzles to solve. They are tools to break the timeline in your mind. They present impossible situations, sound of one hand clapping, the original face before your parents were born, not to confuse, but to stop the mind from reaching into memory or logic. Each time the mind tries to answer from the past, the koan dissolves the attempt. It drives you into the only place answers truly arise, right now, without delay, without reference, without control. Mu practice is even more direct. It strips language, belief, and memory down to a single sound. The instruction is not to understand Mu, not to interpret it, but to become one with it completely. That means not thinking about Mu as a concept or chanting it like a mantra. It means being so intimate with it that the division between practitioner and practice collapses. There is no time to explain, no time to measure progress. Just one pointed presence so absolute that the past cannot hold and the future cannot enter. This kind of presence begins to feel timeless, not because it stretches forever, but because it doesn't stretch at all. It doesn't extend forward or backward. It just exists, not even as a state, but as the absence of division. In this space, the 3 times, past, present, and future, are not parts of a line. They are labels placed on appearances that arise and vanish instantly. When those labels fall away, what remains is not a point on a timeline. It is timeless awareness, alive, whole, beyond duration. This doesn't mean memories stop arising or plans stop forming. It means they are no longer confused with truth. A memory is seen as a current mental image, not a return to a real past. A plan is seen as a present thought about an imagined future, not an actual step forward in time. This breaks the weight of time-based identity. You no longer define yourself by what happened. You no longer fear becoming something later. Because all that ever really appears is this movement, this breath, this sound, and none of it lasts long enough to become a self. Zen calls this suchness, reality as it is, without commentary, without comparison. The mind no longer splits experience into this happened, this is happening, or this will happen. It simply meets what arises. When a bell rings, there is no before or after. There is only the ringing. When you eat, there is only chewing. When you walk, there is only the foot touching earth. The past doesn't trail behind you. The future doesn't hang in front of you. Both are cut by full attention. This cutting doesn't lead to emptiness in the hollow sense, it leads to immediacy. When mental time collapses, aliveness expands. Every sound becomes sharper, every movement becomes clearer, because you are not interpreting anything through delay. Nothing is passed through memory or expectation. Everything is direct. This directness is not intensity, it's simplicity. It doesn't require effort. It requires the absence of grasping. The grasping that tries to hold on to the moment as mine or tries to predict what will follow. Without that grasping, time loses its relevance, and in that, peace arises, not because something was added, but because tension was dropped. Zen practice encourages this dropping through forms, through silence, through paradox. A master may shout, hit, or give a response that seems absurd, not to cause harm, but to dislodge the mental structure of time, to reveal the gap between thought and awareness. That gap is not empty, it is the true center of freedom, and it cannot be entered. It can only be lived. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. You still show up for your life. You still keep your word. But you don't use the future to justify worry. You don't use the past to justify pain. You act in the moment, from the moment. Not as someone building a timeline, but as life expressing itself without reference. Even language softens. You no longer need to tell stories about yourself. I always do this. I never get that right. This will probably happen again. These are time-built identities. They maintain your prison. When they are seen as just thoughts, they lose power. You no longer walk through life carrying a biography. You just walk. And when someone asks, "Who are you?" there is no need to answer with a past. You can simply say, "Right now," breathing, hearing, feeling, and it's enough. Because there is no other time, no other version of you that exists. Everything else is a memory, an image, a projection. None of it is here. Zen doesn't teach timelessness as a reward. It doesn't promise peace in the future. It doesn't point to enlightenment as a someday goal. It offers a mirror with no frame, no past, no reflection. Just what is. When you stop looking into it as someone with a story, you see clearly, not what is coming, not what has been, only what is. Let yourself rest in that, not with thought, with awareness that doesn't reach. Let the timeline fade. Let the need to know what time it is dissolve. Let there be just this seeing, this hearing, this breath. No past behind it, no future ahead. Only now, without now. Only here, with no here. Only freedom. When mental time dissolves and the need to preserve or reach collapses, what's left is nothing we can hold. There's no past to carry, no future to chase, not even a present moment to freeze. There is just what is, happening without reference, lived without identity. And yet even within this freedom, the habitual momentum to leave a trace, to assert presence, to be someone, even subtly, can still echo in the background. The final grasp often appears as a whisper, "Let me be remembered," or "Let me make something of this." But the Buddha used a word for one who had passed beyond even this. Tathagata, not just a title, not a metaphor, a direct expression of living without leaving footprints. Tathagata is a term found throughout the early discourses. The Buddha referred to himself this way, not as a person, not as an awakened identity, but as one who had thus come or thus gone. The word holds both directions at once. It points to one who arrives without arrival, departs without departure. Someone who appears without becoming and moves through the world without clinging to it or resisting it. One who is not bound by history or momentum, not disappearing, but not leaving anything behind either. Complete presence, complete release. In practice, this points to a way of living so quietly that it leaves no residue. Not silence in sound, but in intention. Not disappearance of form, but of self-reference. To walk through life without ownership, without the invisible signatures we usually leave on every experience. No mark saying, "This is mine." No echo of, "Remember me." To be here fully, yet never fixated. To move, speak, respond, and then let it all vanish without holding anything in place. The conditioned mind is always building presence through impression. It seeks to be someone in memory, in impact, in outcome. Even when not chasing fame or status, it still wants recognition. It still wants to exist in others' minds as something. But Tathagata living dissolves this. It offers no story, no continuity, no shape. It's not about appearing wise or humble. It's about not appearing at all, not in the sense of avoidance, but in the absence of clinging to image. This doesn't mean detachment from the world. It means such intimacy with the flow of life that nothing sticks. You help when needed. You leave when it's time. You don't look back to see if your name remains. The ego often seeks subtle forms of permanence, even in spiritual life, wanting to be seen as someone who has let go, someone who embodies truth. But Tathagata points past even this. It's not the person who practices well. It's what remains when the person dissolves entirely. This way of being is grounded in non-possession, not just of objects or titles, but of experience. You stop collecting your own life. The moments are not yours. They are not evidence. They do not add up to a self. Each one arises and ends, clean, unheld. When walking, there is just the walking. When speaking, only the sound. When thinking, only the movement of mind. No self-portrait is being painted across time. And so, identity thins. You no longer measure your growth. You no longer define your past. You stop naming yourself even as a nobody. Not because identity is bad, but because it is unnecessary. Tathagata is not about being invisible. It's about no longer needing to be seen. The movement becomes like wind, passing, touching, and then gone. And yet it changes everything precisely because it leaves nothing behind. This touches deeply on freedom, not freedom to do whatever you want. Freedom from the compulsion to be anyone at all. Even in relationships, this has power. You love, not to be loved back. You listen, not to be wise. You offer, not to be remembered. Your presence is full, but it doesn't form a shape that others must carry. You give and release. You speak and release. You live and release. To live this way is not to disappear from life, but to participate without dragging history forward. You're not writing a story of becoming. You're not shaping an arc. You're not trying to land in a final version of yourself. Every gesture, every word, every silence is complete as it is. It doesn't need a sequel. It doesn't need a label. In Tathagata living, the moment is so whole, it erases itself. This brings a simplicity that cannot be reached by organizing life better. It comes only when the mind no longer calculates, when the outcome doesn't matter, when presence doesn't have to lead anywhere. You don't need to become lighter, you need to stop gathering. You don't need to ascend, you need to stop leaving a path behind you. Even when others want to define you, you don't resist, but you don't join in. The image they hold is theirs. You no longer invest in it. You're not rejecting connection. You're simply not solidifying it into identity. In this way, you are available to others without being possessed by their views. You become trustworthy because you have nothing to defend. You don't adjust to maintain image. You don't shrink to avoid impression. You let each moment stand alone. In meditation, this becomes a subtle refinement. At first, the mind clings to silence, then to clarity, then to the one who observes. Finally, there may be a temptation to observe the silence and think, I have become spacious. But Tathagata points to the vanishing of even that thought, not the ending of awareness, but the ending of attachment to its purity. Awareness is not yours. It doesn't need a name. It doesn't need to be preserved. When this way of living is embodied, you stop leaving spiritual footprints. You don't move through teachings as if collecting insight. You don't turn experiences into achievements. You don't look back at your progress. You don't look ahead for completion. You just respond now. You don't carry the trace of the last moment. You don't cast a shadow into the next. This is not passivity. It's engagement without residue, action without fixation, clarity without commentary. And it's not aloofness. It's intimacy without identity. You can smile, touch, hold, weep, laugh, but nothing sticks to you. Nothing becomes a monument to your existence. You are fully here, but always unformed. This is the way the Buddha lived, not as someone who won enlightenment, but as someone who stopped collecting the conditions of self. He responded to needs. He met people where they were, but when he moved on, he didn't leave a version of himself behind. His footprints dissolved into earth as he walked. That's why the word Tathagata matters. It points not to arrival, not to escape, but to the one who walks without burden, without legacy, without trace. To practice this is to walk through your own life without adding weight. Each step is full, but it leaves no pressure. Each breath is lived, but it doesn't need to be remembered. Even grief is held, but not claimed. Even love is shared, but not possessed. You don't hoard experiences. You let them arrive, and you let them go. No shells remain. Let that become real now, not as something to believe, but as something to live. Let go of yesterday's version of you. Let go of the plan to become someone better tomorrow. Let this moment pass through you like wind through trees. Let your presence touch the world without gripping it. Let your words dissolve in air as soon as they're spoken. You don't have to become anything. You don't have to be seen. You don't have to be remembered. You are allowed to pass through this world like a soft flame, bright, complete, and untraced. Tathagata is not a concept to study. It is a life to live. No arrival, no departure, just presence and release. When movement through life leaves no trace, when each step disappears behind itself without carrying identity forward, a deep stillness opens. There is no story to follow, no self to protect, no image to preserve. Presence becomes simple. But even in this simplicity, something can quietly re-enter. A feeling so pure, so beautiful, it seems impossible to question. Joy, radiance, deep pleasure, the experience of meditative bliss. And while it may appear harmless or even holy, this too can become a subtle trap. The danger is not in the joy itself, but in the clinging to it, the desire to return to it, the identification with the one who feels it. Even the most refined pleasure, when held, becomes another burden. In early Buddhist texts, two states are often mentioned with reverence: piti and sukha. Piti is rapture or delight. Sukha is happiness or contentment. These are not gross pleasures. They are soft, expansive, often wordless. They can arise in meditation when the mind settles, when the body grows quiet, when distractions fall away. They feel clean, free of craving, and they are natural. They arise as signs of concentration, as glimpses of peace. But if not seen clearly, they are mistaken for awakening itself. The mind, especially when new to stillness, can fall in love with these states. They are a relief from agitation, a break from struggle. They offer warmth, safety, and a kind of intimacy that the ordinary world rarely provides. But they also carry a hidden hook. When you taste them and then want them to stay, the seed of clinging is already planted. The mind begins to measure its meditation by their presence. It starts evaluating inner quiet based on whether joy is felt. And once that habit forms, practice becomes performance. The stillness is no longer free. The Buddha spoke directly about this. He warned that even the bliss of deep meditative absorption is impermanent. Even the highest jhanas, those serene states of collectedness, must be seen as conditioned. They arise based on causes. They fall away when those causes fade. If you make them your refuge, you will suffer when they shift. If you take joy as a goal, you create the tension of expectation. And expectation is a form of becoming. It is the mind reaching for future pleasure. There's nothing wrong with piti or sukha themselves. They are not obstacles unless you cling to them. In fact, when they are seen clearly and not held, they deepen concentration and can support insight. But the moment they are grasped, they become sticky. You start to crave their return. You begin to feel something is wrong when they're absent. You subtly resist what is, hoping to restore a past state. This resistance might not be aggressive. It can be gentle, even subconscious. A leaning into memory. A hope that the next breath will bring that soft wave again. A disappointment when it does not. These responses are common, but they are also signs that the mind has begun to bind itself to pleasure. Not gross desire, but refined attachment, the kind that slows release. Some practitioners reach a point where they sit not for liberation, but for the pleasant atmosphere that sitting creates. Meditation becomes a place of escape, not freedom. The cushion is a shelter from discomfort, but also from insight. You stay where it feels good, and in doing so, you stop going deeper. Because true insight often breaks comfort. It shows what you are clinging to. It exposes the roots of becoming. and sometimes that means letting go of even the sweetest internal states. Pleasure can become a substitute for awakening. The feeling of openness is taken as realization. The peace of concentration is confused with the peace of release, but these are not the same. Concentration quiets the mind temporarily. Insight uproots identification permanently. Bliss can support the path, but bliss cannot liberate. Only seeing clearly, without holding, can do that. The subtle problem is that bliss feels like freedom. It mimics it. But true freedom is not dependent on how you feel. It doesn't vanish when joy fades. It doesn't require a particular energy. It remains, even in silence, even in dryness. In fact, the deepest clarity often comes when pleasure is gone and the mind has nothing left to cling to, no beauty to chase, no comfort to maintain, only reality, raw and immediate. Letting go of bliss doesn't mean rejecting it. You don't push it away. You don't label it wrong. You simply don't rest your identity in it. When joy arises, let it arise. When it fades, let it fade. Treat it like any other appearance, impermanent, not self, not to be clung to. If it comes, it comes. If not, nothing is missing. Your practice is not defined by how good it feels. It is defined by how free the mind becomes. There is a story of a meditator who reached great depths of absorption. For years, he sat in radiant states. His mind was still, his breath barely noticeable. But each time he left the cushion, agitation returned. He was confused. How could he be so peaceful in practice and so reactive in life? A teacher told him, "You are not resting in clarity. You are resting in pleasure, and that pleasure is fragile." That was the moment he began again, not chasing bliss, but seeing through it. The same principle applies outside formal meditation. In daily life, pleasure arises constantly. A kind word, a beautiful sound, a sense of harmony. These are not to be denied, but if you begin to depend on them for your well-being, you are trapped. You start to manipulate conditions to keep the feeling. You shape your relationships, your environment, your self-image, all to protect the flow of pleasant experience. And in doing so, you forget that peace was never about control. Letting go of bliss as a goal means trusting what's here, even when it's dry, even when it's silent, even when the heart feels flat. Because truth doesn't always shine. Sometimes it simply sits. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it reveals nothing but stillness. That's where real trust begins. Not when things feel good, but when you stop needing them to. In the deepest stillness, bliss may come. Or not. The mind doesn't care anymore. It doesn't measure. It doesn't compare. It simply watches, quietly, as states arise and fall. No story, no possession, just knowing. And that knowing itself becomes the refuge, not a feeling, not an energy, just clear, unconditioned awareness. Eventually, even the tendency to seek peak states fades. You stop scanning your experience for highlights. You stop chasing after inner fireworks. Your attention rests in what is ordinary, and in that ordinariness you find depth. The taste of tea, the sound of wind, the pause before a word. These are not inferior to bliss. They are often more honest. You may find, after letting go, that joy still comes. But now it has no hook. It doesn't promise anything. It doesn't pull you in. It's light, like a breeze. Refreshing, but not necessary. You don't arrange your life around it. You don't shape your practice for it. You let it come and go like all things. This is the freedom beyond pleasure, not the absence of joy, but the absence of dependence. You are no longer a collector of states. You are no longer seeking confirmation that your path is working. You are no longer trying to replicate the past. You are simply here, present, open, without clinging, without resistance. Let that openness deepen now. Let any pleasure that arises be seen, known, and released. Let every moment pass through you without being owned. You don't need to hold on. You don't need to resist. You don't need to get back to anything. There is nothing to return to. There is only now. Only this breath. Only this clear seeing. And that is enough. When the longing for bliss fades and the craving for extraordinary states dissolves, the heart grows quieter in a new way. There's no longer a chase for light, no pressure to feel anything special. Clarity becomes ordinary, peace simple. And yet, in that stillness, the mind may begin to reach for understanding again, not in the form of pleasure, but through insight. It wants to know, to define, to grasp reality through thought. But what if even that is a subtle tension? What if the next barrier is not emotion or sensation, but meaning itself? Zen, in its rawest expression, meets this tension with paradox. It cuts directly into the need to resolve, and in doing so, it breaks the mind open, not by explaining, but by confronting it with what cannot be explained. Koans are the heart of this method. Unlike philosophical questions that invite analysis, a koan short-circuits your tendency to think your way to freedom. A classic example: what is your original face before your parents were born? This is not a riddle to be solved. It is a door that won't open by pushing. The mind hears it and begins to spin. It looks for history. It looks for logic. But every approach collapses. The question is impossible, deliberately so, because its function is not to lead you to a conclusion. It's to expose the limits of your mental strategies. In daily life, the mind constantly reaches for answers. It wants security, meaning, orientation. It tries to settle uncertainty by forming concepts. Even in spiritual practice, this continues. You understand a teaching, and the mind builds a structure. You have an insight, and the mind tries to name it. But with every name, a weight is added. A framework begins to form, and that framework, even if it feels stable, is still a burden. It becomes something you must carry, defend, maintain. Zen sees this and offers no comfort. Instead, it offers a blow. A koan is not a gentle guide, it's a hammer. It comes without explanation. It refuses to make sense. It doesn't care about your beliefs, your progress, your theories. It cares only about breaking the chain of mental clinging. It doesn't do this by attacking logic directly. It does it by demanding a response that logic cannot produce. The koan is a mirror with no reflection. You look into it, and what you find is not an image, but your own mental effort staring back. You try to answer, and the koan silently watches as each attempt falls apart. And in that falling apart, something real begins to appear. Not a new answer, not a final truth, but presence without fixation, awareness without form. This is the purpose of paradox, to collapse the machinery of control. The mind can't cling when it doesn't know what to hold. It can't compare when there is no reference point. It can't organize when every conclusion slips away. The result is not confusion, but stillness, not chaos, but release. In Zen training, a student may sit with a koan for years, not to find the right words, but to exhaust the mind's defenses. Eventually, all attempts are burned away, and what's left is not an answer, but an experience. The question lives in the body. It breathes through silence. It reveals not something to know, but something to be. And that being is not conceptual. It has no form, no content, no position. This kind of freedom is deep because it's not built on knowledge. It's built on unknowing. A deliberate letting go of resolution, a willingness to remain in contact with what cannot be wrapped in thought. That contact is raw, honest, and intimate. It strips away the layers of identity until only this moment remains, undefined, unfixed, unburdened. Another famous koan asks, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" The expected answer is yes, according to traditional teachings. But the Zen master replies, "Mu," meaning no, or, more precisely, not applicable. The point is not theological. The point is to shock the student out of assuming they understand the nature of mind, to shake the ground beneath their certainty, not to destroy them, but to open them. In this opening, the usual sense of self weakens. You stop living through definitions. You stop explaining yourself to yourself. You stop needing each moment to fit into your idea of the path. The path disappears, and what remains is life itself, without story, without shape, just immediacy. Koans are not always verbal. Life itself becomes the koan. A door slams, a bell rings, a leaf falls. You walk into a room and forget why. These moments carry the same force as the classic koan if you meet them without naming, if you let them land without turning them into meaning. Every moment is already a question. Every experience is already impossible to explain completely. The mind's habit is to translate, to reduce, to interpret. But what happens when you don't? You feel raw life. Not poetic life, not philosophical life, just this. Cold, warm, loud, still, painful, tender. Each sensation, each sound, free of the weight of understanding. You don't need to call it anything. You don't need to get it right. You just need to be with it, not as an observer, not as a meditator, but as presence itself. Koan practice trains this muscle. It returns the mind to its natural state, not silent, but unbound. You can think, but you're not trapped by thought. You can feel, but you're not owned by feeling. The response to the koan is not in words, it's in how you live, how you meet what cannot be controlled, how you stay open when the mind wants to close. This is not about solving paradox, it's about dissolving the self who needs to solve. That self may have been hidden in sincerity, it may have worn the robes of the seeker, it may have sat with perfect posture, saying all the right things. But the koan doesn't care. It burns through all of it, not to punish, but to free. And when that freedom arises, it doesn't look impressive. You may feel nothing at all, just a quiet softening, just the absence of pressure, just the release of needing to know. That is the fruit of koan practice. Not brilliance, not answers, but peace that doesn't depend on resolution. Zen masters often say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The surface does not change, the form remains. But the burden is gone, because the one who needed to carry something is no longer trying to make sense of what cannot be grasped. Let that letting go begin now, not through force, but through surrender. Let the mind ask its questions, let them echo unanswered. Let your silence be your only reply. You don't need to solve life. You don't need to explain your experience. You only need to stop clinging to the idea that you must. Release even your need for clarity. Let paradox be your teacher. Let the unresolvable free you from the habit of explaining. Let the question live in you like breath. No answer, no conclusion, only presence. Only now, only this. After sitting with paradox until the need to understand dissolves, after letting the unresolvable do its quiet work inside the mind, a kind of space appears, not a blankness, but a relief from forming conclusions. The mind loosens its grip on knowing, and something deeper begins to settle. But even here, even when no answers are clung to, another subtle habit can appear. It's not a grasping at self or at feeling or even at clarity. It is the attachment to the idea of emptiness itself, a subtle identification with formlessness, a quiet pride in having seen through the world, a new certainty that there is nothing. This too becomes a view. This too becomes a trap, and according to the Madhyamaka teachings, even this must be released. The Madhyamaka school, rooted in the work of Nagarjuna, holds a mirror to the very structure of how views are formed and then mistaken for truth. Its purpose is not to replace one belief with another, but to remove the belief that any view can be final. Even the view of emptiness, so central, so liberating, is shown to be just another conceptual tool. Useful, sharp, transformative, but not ultimate. Once it has served its purpose, it must be dropped. This is called the emptiness of emptiness. Shunyata itself is not a thing. It's not a position to hold. It is the realization that all things, including all teachings, are empty of inherent existence. This includes the teaching of emptiness. If this is not understood, then the mind subtly reattaches to a new frame. It begins to think in terms of negation, as if the denial of essence is itself an essence. It clings to the idea that nothing is real, and that clinging becomes its new burden. In practice, this can show up in many ways. A meditator begins to feel disillusioned with the world, not because they see through illusion, but because they now believe everything is meaningless. They repeat phrases like, "It's all empty," in place of insight. They reduce the complexity of life to a single explanation and then rest inside that idea as if it were safety. But this is not release. It is a new kind of conceptual prison, one without color, one without movement, a view of emptiness that has hardened into belief. The true understanding of emptiness is not nihilism. It does not mean that nothing exists or that nothing matters. It means that things do not exist with fixed, independent nature. They arise through conditions, they depend on other things, and they cannot be pinned down. Emptiness is the insight that all appearances are dependently co-arisen. Their lack of essence does not make them unreal, it makes them fluid, interrelated, and free of fixed identity. To hold emptiness as a conclusion is to mistake the pointing finger for the moon. The teaching shows you how to look, but it is not what you are looking at. When emptiness becomes a concept, it behaves like any other mental construction. It begins to shape how you interpret the world. You start dismissing things as illusion rather than engaging with them skillfully. You start stepping back from experience, not because of clarity, but because you are hiding behind a philosophy. This is why Nagarjuna wrote that the one who clings to emptiness is incurable, because they are now attached to the very thing meant to free them. They've built a new self-image, a new stance, around not having one. They've mistaken the absence of form for some superior truth, and so their mind closes again, only this time around the idea of openness. The antidote is subtle but clear. Don't hold emptiness. Use it to release the grip of views, and then release the view of emptiness. Don't take it as your identity. Don't preach it to yourself or to others. Let it do its work like fire burns rope. Once the knot is undone, you don't carry the ashes. You walk away free. This is not about avoiding language. It's about not mistaking language for reality. You can talk about emptiness, study it, reflect on it, but always remember it's a tool, not a destination. Once it points you to freedom, let the pointing go. If you carry it further, it becomes weight. In meditation, this letting go of emptiness appears as a softening of certainty. You don't need to label experience as empty. You don't need to reduce the world to absence. You sit with what is, without solidifying it and without negating it. Sounds, thoughts, sensations all arise as before, but they're not locked into meaning, nor are they denied. They simply arise and pass in their own nature, not clung to, not dismissed. When the view of emptiness is dropped, what remains is not confusion. What remains is freedom from the need to resolve. The world becomes vivid again, but without stickiness. You see movement, color, emotion, thought, but you don't form identity around any of it. Nor do you turn it into a teaching. It's just experience, unfolding, without essence and without rejection. This openness allows compassion to flow naturally. When emptiness is misused, it can numb empathy. Its all illusion can be used as an excuse to disengage. But when emptiness is seen clearly, you realize that suffering too is dependently arisen. That pain is real in its effects, even if empty in its nature. This understanding opens the heart. You don't cling, but you care. You don't hold, but you respond. There is no attachment to a fixed self, but there is deep connection to life as it is. In dialogue, you no longer try to win arguments about truth. You don't need to correct others or convince them of non-duality. You listen without turning someone's words into a battlefield. Because there is no final view to defend, no ultimate position to assert. Every perspective is partial, every thought is conditioned. You engage not to fix, but to meet, not to hold, but to understand. This freedom even transforms your relationship to teachings. You stop seeking ultimate conclusions from teachers or texts. You read, you hear, you absorb, but without clinging to interpretation. You allow the teachings to live in you as living questions, not finished answers. You let them move through you like breath, not like bricks. And then, when others ask you about emptiness, you may smile, not because you know, but because you no longer need to know in the way you once did. You no longer define yourself by what you've realized. You don't make emptiness your truth. You just live without carrying the tension of belief. To live this way is not to be passive, it is to be unburdened. You move through life without grasping at explanations, without clinging to frameworks. You act with care, with clarity, with immediacy. But you don't narrate yourself as someone who knows emptiness. You don't add a layer of insight onto your identity. And if you find yourself clinging to the memory of non-clinging, let that go too. Let everything be subject to release, including the view that release must look a certain way. The emptiness of emptiness is not a special insight. It is the loosening of the last finger around the last view. Nothing in your hand, nothing in your mind, nothing left to explain. Let that be enough. Let this moment appear and disappear without needing to define it. Let every thought, every feeling, every movement arise without building a view. Let the teaching of emptiness pass through you and dissolve. There is no need to carry it further. You are already free. When even the view of emptiness has been let go, when the teachings themselves are no longer clung to, when the path dissolves beneath your feet and no final truth remains to be protected, what is left is something open, unshaped, and quietly free. There is no longer a need to arrive anywhere or explain anything. Yet right there, in the clear light of that openness, another challenge can appear, subtle but heavy. The weight of insight itself, not the grasping at conclusions, but the quiet accumulation of understanding that becomes its own kind of burden. This is the dukkha of knowing, the suffering that comes when even truth, if unbalanced, becomes something the heart can no longer carry. It begins innocently, with study, reflection, sharp observation. You begin to see deeply into things. You understand patterns, mechanisms of thought, structures of suffering. You see cause and effect more clearly. You see impermanence and interdependence not just as ideas, but as realities shaping every moment. There's a sharpness to it, a clarity that feels both humbling and empowering. And this can help at first. It dissolves illusions, it breaks through confusion, it brings relief. But insight, when collected without grounding in presence and compassion, can slowly harden into pressure. The mind becomes used to dissecting everything. Even joy is observed, taken apart, reduced. Every experience is measured against principles. Spontaneity is filtered through analysis. Instead of resting in life, you are interpreting it constantly. The present moment becomes a stage for insight rather than a place to simply be. The trouble isn't insight itself. The trouble is when insight stays in the head, abstracted from direct feeling. When truth becomes something you think instead of something you live. You know the self is empty, but you're still defending it in subtle ways. You understand dependent origination, but you're overwhelmed by your reactions. You've studied the teachings, but they haven't yet sunk into your body. So instead of helping you open, the knowledge starts to weigh you down. This creates a new kind of tension. You believe you should be beyond certain habits. You assume you've gone deeper than your actions suggest. And then shame arises, or frustration. Why am I still caught in this if I already know better? That question doesn't free you. It quietly binds you again, using your own insight as the rope. This is the shadow side of wisdom not yet embodied. It knows too much and feels too little. The dukkha of knowing also shows up in relationships. When someone speaks from emotion, you listen from theory. When someone shares a struggle, you frame it in terms of clinging or non-self rather than meeting them with your heart. Knowledge becomes a lens that separates you rather than a bridge that connects. It can turn real moments into lessons, and in doing so, you stop showing up as a person. You become a collection of understandings, and others feel the distance. There's also the fatigue that comes from never resting in unknowing. The compulsion to explain experience to yourself, to translate every silence, every feeling, into something that fits within your conceptual map. You forget how to sit with the rawness of life. You forget how to cry without narrating why. You forget how to be confused without solving it. And over time, the insights, once liberating, start to close in. They become a wall, a mental structure so refined, so well-intended, that you don't see how it traps you. This is where surrender becomes essential. Not surrender of values or effort, but surrender of interpretation. Letting truth be what it is, without needing to always understand it. Allowing mystery to stay mystery. Allowing pain to be felt before it is studied. Allowing life to touch you without commentary. True practice brings balance between knowing and being. It includes moments of clarity, yes, but also moments of softness, vulnerability, and silence. Insight matures when it's no longer something you tell yourself, but something your whole body expresses without effort. Like the way trees bend in the wind, not because they understand wind, but because they are part of its movement. To reach this balance, humility is needed. Not the kind that says, "I know nothing," but the kind that says, "What I know is not enough to protect me from being human." Because being human is not a flaw. It's the place where compassion becomes real. The more clearly you see suffering, the more your heart should open, not just your intellect. Sometimes it helps to pause the seeking, to stop reading, stop reflecting, and simply breathe. Simply feel your feet on the floor, your chest rising and falling. Let insight go quiet. Let the body speak. Let your inner world soften without needing to describe it. When the habit to analyze rises, notice it. Smile at it. Let it pass. And return to presence, not as a technique, but as a way of remembering that you are here. Practice then becomes less about gaining insight and more about making space. Space for emotion, space for silence, space for not knowing. In that space, insight still arises, but it's lighter. It's not carried like a weight. It moves through you. It informs your choices. It sharpens your attention, but it doesn't define you. It doesn't replace your presence. This shift also changes how you engage with others. You listen with your whole body, not just your mind. You respond not with teachings, but with care. You speak not to correct, but to connect. Your knowledge doesn't overshadow the moment. It supports it quietly, like roots under soil. And you begin to trust direct experience again. Not because it's always pleasant, but because it's real. You don't need to translate every feeling into a teaching. Sometimes pain is just pain. Sometimes joy is just joy. When the mind doesn't rush to explain, the heart finds room to breathe. The dukkha of knowing lifts when you stop using insight as armor, when you let truth be soft, when you let yourself feel without filtering, and when you remember that understanding is not the end point, it is just one movement in a larger dance. You don't have to discard what you've learned. You just stop leaning on it. You let it settle into the background, like furniture in a well-used room. It's there, supportive, useful, but not the center of your attention. The center is this breath, this person in front of you, this fragile, changing life that asks not to be explained, but to be met. And slowly, the mind stops searching for conclusions. It begins to enjoy resting in questions. It accepts not knowing as a form of wisdom. It lets silence speak. It lets the heart guide. And in that shift, knowing becomes light again, not a burden, not a mask, but a quiet companion on the path that no longer needs to be walked with certainty. Let that lightness return now. Let the teachings you've gathered settle like dust. Let them be part of you without pressing you. Let the need to understand give way to a willingness to feel. Let the burden of knowing dissolve in the gentleness of being. Nothing more is needed. When the burden of knowing dissolves and truth no longer demands explanation, the heart begins to rest again in something far more intimate than philosophy. Direct life, raw and untamed. Not filtered through insight, not trimmed down into spiritual narratives, but felt, fully, as it is. And this is where the next edge appears. Because even without mental clinging, what still surges through the body and mind, anger, lust, fear, confusion, often feels unspiritual, inconvenient, or out of place. The tendency may return to manage or suppress, to reject these energies as impurities. But there is a path that points in another direction entirely, one that does not purify by removal, but transforms through complete inclusion. This is the heart of Vajrayana Tantra, not escaping the mind's raw material, but using it. Tantric practice does not divide the world into sacred and profane. It does not assume that difficult states must be conquered or transcended. It teaches that everything arising in the body-mind can be fuel for awakening if approached with clarity, fearlessness, and skill. The approach is radical not because it is wild, but because it refuses to exclude anything. The very emotions that might make someone feel furthest from the path, rage, craving, grief, are seen as potent doorways, not distractions, not failings, doorways. In this view, anger is not inherently toxic. It is raw, concentrated energy. When met with mindfulness and transformed through understanding, it reveals a sharp clarity, a penetrating wisdom that cuts through illusion. Lust is not inherently a problem. It is the intense pull of desire, the magnetism that binds you to objects, but also the heat of creation, the longing for union, the fire of life itself. Confusion, when not resisted, becomes the space in which everything dissolves, the very ground of non-conceptual awareness. But none of this transformation happens by indulging or denying. It happens by turning directly toward the energy as it is, without judgment, and letting it teach you, letting it unravel the concepts you usually place around it. This is not about acting out. It's about meeting the core vibration of the experience before it turns into a story or reaction. And in that meeting, its nature becomes visible, not as an obstacle, but as another expression of mind's luminous clarity. Tantra begins where conventional practice might hesitate, where other paths often emphasize purification and restraint, Tantra speaks to integration, not the kind that blurs everything together, but the kind that reveals the true face of what you've been running from. It says, you don't need to fix your mind. You need to see it fully. You don't need to eliminate your desires. You need to know what they really are. Beneath every impulse is a vital force, not pure or impure, just alive. The key is seeing its shape before ego wraps around it. This path requires a different kind of courage. Not the courage to be disciplined, but the courage to be intimate with your own experience, especially the parts that feel threatening. It's not comfortable to look at rage without justification, or to sit with longing without reaching for it, or to feel helplessness without immediately trying to make it meaningful. But if you can stay with these energies, not as problems, but as expressions of awareness, something deep opens. They begin to shift on their own. In tantric practice, symbolic deities often embody these raw states in their purest, unfiltered form. Wrathful forms, wild forms, sensual forms. They are not idols to worship. They are mirrors. They show you what your own mind is made of when it drops the mask of self-judgment. When you recognize that the deity is not outside of you, but the very energy you're feeling, stripped of clinging, you begin to understand what transformation means. Not turning lead into gold, but seeing that lead was never impure. This teaching doesn't deny that actions have consequences. It doesn't promote chaos. It simply shifts the focus from suppression to understanding, from control to direct contact. You don't lash out in anger. You feel it rise. You stay present. You follow its heat down to its root. You find where it protects something, where it wants something, where it hides something. And as you stay with it, without acting and without pushing it away, the sharpness becomes illumination. The fire becomes light. The same is true for desire. It begins as movement toward an object. But if you pause, if you hold that desire without grabbing, it opens. It starts to pulse. It becomes energy, not directed outward, but contained within. Not repressed, but unhooked from the fantasy. That energy, when turned inward, becomes blissful presence. A natural warmth that doesn't need fulfillment, because it is already full. Confusion, so often avoided, holds its own key. In the moment of not knowing, the ego tries to collapse the space with answers. But if you don't collapse it, if you stay in the uncertainty, the thinking mind gives up. In that giving up, a deeper intelligence begins to speak, not in thoughts, but in the silence behind them. That silence is not empty, it is vast, and when you trust it, even confusion becomes a teacher. All of this requires stability. Tantra is not a beginner's game. It demands a strong foundation in mindfulness, concentration, and self-honesty. Without that, the risk is getting swept away. Using the language of transformation to justify unconsciousness. But when practiced with discipline and care, Tantra offers a powerful path to freedom, not by purifying the mind, but by revealing that nothing in the mind was ever unworthy of attention. This view relieves the practitioner from the burden of trying to be good. It opens a space where being real is more important than being right, where the depth of one's humanity is not a flaw, but the very material of awakening. You are not asked to become someone else. You are asked to see yourself so clearly that there is no one left to resist. In this space, practice becomes honest. You stop trying to remove what feels messy. You stop pretending that peace means comfort. You meet your own mind like a landscape, with mountains and storms and clear skies alike. There is no weather that disqualifies awakening. There is only how you relate to what appears. This is not theoretical. You don't need to believe in tantric cosmology to live this way. You only need to stop pushing parts of yourself into the corner. You only need to stay present when you most want to leave. The mind becomes your teacher, not your judge, and everything it throws up becomes fuel. You don't overcome your anger by fighting it. You transmute it by understanding it fully. You don't escape desire by numbing it. You free it by meeting it without acting on it. You don't fix confusion by replacing it with certainty. You let it dissolve into silence. And over time, the division between sacred and profane dissolves. You no longer wait for a better version of yourself to arrive. You practice right here with what's present. Your thoughts, your urges, your struggles, they are not in the way. They are the path, the exact place where awakening can happen if you stop trying to replace experience with theory. Let that shift happen now. Let the heat of emotion rise without fear. Let desire come forward without shame. Let confusion be honored as part of the unfolding. Don't reach for purity. Don't perform stillness. Be with what arises, fully, without running. Your liberation is not elsewhere. It is here, in the raw material of your mind, in the places you once called flaws, in the energy you were told to fear, in the very things you thought needed to be removed. Tantra says nothing needs to be thrown away. Everything can be used. Let it begin now. And now, everything has been said, only silence remains. We've walked through the deepest corners of the mind, not to rearrange them, but to let them go. Together, we've peeled back the layers of stress and identity, of effort and becoming, of fear and even insight itself. We saw that you don't need to fix the mind. You just need to stop carrying what was never yours. You've seen how thought isn't personal, how the story of time unravels in stillness, how the desire to be, even to be good, can become a quiet chain. We've learned to let go not only of craving and confusion, but of progress, of witnessing, of even emptiness itself. And in the end, the most profound teaching was always this: there's nothing left to hold, not even the teachings. So tonight, don't strive to become lighter, just let it all drop. Let the dust settle, let the mind return to its natural openness. Rest not as someone falling asleep, but as no one, just breath, just space, just this. Now, it's your turn to share. In the comments, write just one word that describes what you're releasing tonight. A fear, a label, an expectation, a role, whatever it is, name it and let it go. Sometimes, the act of naming is the beginning of freedom. And if this journey helped you in any way, subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep waking up together, even in our sleep. Sleep well, let go, be free.